This is the first book in the Wizards of Once series. The series will be released half a book at a time. Look out every Saturday 6 p.m. in the time zone GMT+2. Side note. I do not claim by any right to say that I published them, but give full credit to Cressida, Cowell and David Tennant. Subscribe and turn on notifications to find out what happens next. I hope these books give you the joy and magic they give me when I listen to them. Enjoy and listen intently.
The Wizards of Once by Cressida Cowell. Read by David Tennant. This is a story with two heroes. The boy, Czar, is from a wizard tribe, but he has no magic, and he will do anything to get it. The girl, Wish, is from a warrior tribe, but she owns a banned magical object, and she will do anything to conceal it. Prologue. Once there was magic. It was a long, long time ago, in a British Isle so old it did not know it was the British Isles yet, and the magic lived in the dark forests. Perhaps you feel that you know what a dark forest looks like. Well, I can tell you right now that you don't. These were forests darker than you would believe possible, darker than ink spots, darker than midnight, darker than space itself, and as twisted and as tangled as a witch's heart. They were what is now known as wild woods, and they stretched as far in every direction as you can possibly imagine, only stopping when they reached a sea. There were many types of humans living in the wild woods. The wizards, who were magic, and the warriors, who were not. The wizards had lived in the wild woods for as long as anyone could remember, and they were intending to live there forever, along with all the other magic things. Until the warriors came. The warriors invaded from across the seas, and though they had no magic, they brought a new weapon that they called iron. And iron was the only thing that magic could not work on. The warriors had iron swords, and iron shields, and iron armour, and even the horrifying magic of the witches was powerless against this metal. First, the warriors fought the witches, and drove them into extinction in a long and terrible battle. Nobody cried for the witches. For witches were bad magic, the worst sort of magic, the kind of magic that tore wings from larks and killed for fun, and could end the world and everyone in it. But the warriors did not stop there. The warriors thought that just because some magic was bad, that meant that all magic was bad. So now the warriors were trying to get rid of the wizards too, and the ogres, and the werewolves, and the untidy quarrelling mess of good sprites and bad sprites that burned like little stars through the darkness, casting mischievous spells on each other, and the giants who moved slow and careful through the undergrowth, larger than mammoths and peaceable as babies. The warriors had sworn that they would not rest until they had destroyed every last bit of magic in the whole of that dark forest, which they were chopping down as fast as they could with their iron axes to build their forts and their fields and their new modern world. Queen Sycorax, Iron Warrior Queen, had nailed a notice to many trees which read, "You have now entered the Iron Warrior Empire. All magic is banned in this territory. No sprites, no giants, no roger breaths, no snowcats, no werewolves, no green teeths or any other magic creatures. No flying, no enchanted objects, no spelling, cursing or charming, no magic whatsoever. And any wizards entering these lands may most unfortunately have their heads removed. By order of Her Majesty, Queen Sycorax, Iron Warrior Queen. This is the story of a young boy wizard and a young girl warrior who have been taught since birth to hate each other like poison. The story begins with the discovery of a gigantic black feather. Could it be that the wizards and the warriors have been so busy fighting each other that they have not noticed the return of an ancient evil? Could that feather really be the feather of a witch? I am a character in this story who sees everything, knows everything. I will not tell you who I am. See if you can guess. The story begins here. Don't get lost. These woods are dangerous. Part 1. Disobedience. 1. A trap to catch a witch. It was a warm night for November. Too warm a night for witches, or so the stories said. Witches were supposed to be extinct, of course, but Tsar had heard about the way they stank, and he imagined he could smell that now, in the quietness of the dark forest, a faint but definite stink of burning hair mixed with long-dead mice and a little kick of viper's venom, once smelled, never forgotten. Tsar was a wild young human boy who belonged to the wizard tribe. He was riding on the back of a giant snowcat in a part of the forest so dark and mangled and tangled that it was known as the Badwoods. He should not have been there, for the Badwoods were warrior territory, and if the warriors were to catch him, well, what everyone said was Tsar would be killed on sight. Off with his head, as was the pleasant warrior custom. But Tsar did not look even remotely worried. He was a cheerful scruff of a boy with a tremendous quiff of hair shooting upwards from his forehead, as if it had accidentally come into contact with some invisible vertical hurricane. The snowcat he was riding was called King Cat, a noble creature which was a giant form of lynx, far too dignified for his cheeky master. King Cat had shining paws, so round they looked unreal, fur so deep it was like powder snow, and such a rich silver-grey colour that it was almost blue. The snowcat ran swiftly but softly through the forest, his black-tipped ears swivelling from side to side as he ran, for he was scared, although too proud to show it. Only that very morning, Tsar's father, Incanzo the Enchanter, king of wizards, had reminded everyone that it was forbidden for any wizard to dare set one toe in the Badwoods. But Tsar was the most disobedient boy in the wizard kingdom in about 4 generations, and forbidding things only encouraged him. In the past week, for instance, Tsar had tied the beards of 2 of the eldest and most respectable wizards together when they were sleeping at a banquet. He had poured a love potion into the pigs' feeding trough, so the pigs developed mad, passionate crushes on Tsar's least favourite teacher, and followed him around wherever he went, making loud, enthusiastic squealing and kissing noises. He had accidentally burned down the western trees in Wizard Camp. Most of these things hadn't been entirely intentional, exactly. Tsar had just got carried away in the heat of the moment. And yet none of these disobedient things was half as bad as what Tsar was doing right now. There was a large black raven flying above Tsar's head. "This is a very bad idea indeed, Tsar," said the raven. The talking raven was called Caliburn, and he would have been a handsome bird, but unfortunately it was his job to keep Tsar out of trouble, and the worry of this impossible mission meant his feathers kept falling out. "It isn't really fair to lead your animals and sprites and young fellow wizards into all this danger." As the son of the king enchanter, and a boy with a great deal of personal charisma, Tsar had a lot of followers. A pack of 5 wolves, 3 snowcats, a bear, 8 sprites, an enormous giant called Crusher, and a small crowd of other wizard youngsters, all following Tsar as if hypnotised, all shivering and scared, and pretending not to be. "Oh, you worry too much, Caliburn," said Tsar, pulling King Cat to a halt and jumping off his back. "Look at this lovely, pretty little glade here. You see? Perfectly safe, and exactly the same as the rest of the forest." Tsar looked around with breezy satisfaction, as if they had stopped in a delightful woodland dell filled with frolicking bunnies and baby deer, rather than a cold, eerie little clearing where the yews leaned in threateningly and the mistletoe dripped like warlocks' tears. The other wizards drew their swords, and the growling snowcat's fur stood up with fear to such an extent that they looked like furry puffballs. The wolves padded restlessly, trying to form a protective circle around their humans. Only the smaller sprites shared Tsar's enthusiasm, but that was because they were too young to know any better. I don't know if you've ever seen a sprite, so I'd better describe these ones to you. There were 5 larger sprites, all faintly resembling a human crossed with a fierce, elegant insect. When irritated or bored, which was often, they blinked on and off like stars, and purple smoke drifted out of their ears. They were so see-through you could watch their hearts beating. Then there were 3 smaller, younger ones, who, because they were not yet adult, were known as hairy fairies. Tsar's favourite was an eager, slightly stupid little thing called Squeeze Juice. "Oh, it's lovely, lovely," squeaked Squeeze Juice. "It's the tremendously loveliest clearing I've ever seen. What's this for interesting flower? Let me guess, it's a buttercup, it's a daisy, it's a geranium, it's a cauliflower." He flew into the upper branches of a particularly gloomy and sinister tree and perched on the edge of one of its fleshy flowers, which had ominous spikes on the ends of its leaves and was in fact called a sprite-eating hobtrap. The flower snapped shut with the briskness of a mousetrap, capturing poor little Squeeze Juice inside. Caliburn landed on Tsar's shoulder and gave a heavy sigh. "I don't like to say I told you so," said Caliburn, "but we've only been in this perfectly safe little clearing in the Bad Woods for 1.5 minutes, and you've already lost one of your followers to a carnivorous flower." "Nonsense," scolded Tsar good-naturedly. "I haven't lost him. That's the whole point about being a leader. Whenever my followers get into trouble, I rescue them, because that's what a leader does." Tsar climbed the tree, and 200 feet up, swaying precariously on a couple of creaking twig-like boughs, he took out his dagger and popped open the sprite-eating hobtrap to release a panting little Squeeze Juice in the nick of time. "I's fine," squeaked Squeeze Juice. "I's fine. I can't feel my left leg, but I's fine." "Don't worry, Squeeze Juice. That's just the hobtrap's digestive juices. The feeling will return in a couple of hours," Tsar called out as he dropped down from the tree. "You see, I'm a great leader. Stick with me and you'll be fine." The wizard youngsters looked very thoughtful indeed. At that moment, Tsar's older brother Luther came out of the shadows behind them, sitting astride a great grey wolf, and followed by even more sprites and animals and young wizard followers than Tsar himself. Tsar stiffened, because he hated his older brother Luther. Luther was a lot bigger than Tsar. He was nearly as tall as their father. He was brilliant at magic, he was good-looking and clever, and my goodness, didn't he know it. He was the smuggest smug wizard you could possibly imagine, and he often sneaked on Tsar to get Tsar into trouble. "What are you doing here, Luther?" stormed Tsar suspiciously. "Oh, I just followed you to see what unbelievably stupid and pointless thing my ickle baby brother was doing this time," drawled Luther. "Great leaders like me don't do pointless expeditions," fumed Tsar. "We're here for a reason. It's none of your business, but—" Tsar considered telling Luther some elaborate lie about what he was doing, but he couldn't resist showing off. "We're going to catch ourselves a witch," boasted Tsar proudly. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. This was the first time that Tsar had mentioned to his followers the purpose of their expedition, and it was very unwelcome news indeed. A witch! The bear, the snowcats, and the wolves went very still and began to shake. Even Ariel, the wildest and most unafraid of Tsar's sprites, shot up into the air and momentarily disappeared. "There are witches in this part of the Bad Woods now. I know it," whispered Tsar excitedly, as if a witch were a delightful sort of present that he was offering everyone. There was a long silence, and then Luther and his wizard followers began to laugh. They laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed. "Oh, come on, Tsar," Luther said at last, once he'd got his breath back. "Even you must know that witches have been extinct for centuries." "Ah, yes," said Tsar, "but what if some of them survived and have been hiding all this time? Look! Here's what I found in this very clearing only yesterday." Out of his rucksack, he carefully took an absolutely gigantic black feather. It was huge, like the feather of a crow, but much, much larger. A soft black, fading at the end to a glowing, dark, shiny green, the colour of a mallard's head. "It's a witch feather," whispered Tsar. Luther smiled his most superior smile. "That's just the feather of some big old bird," scoffed Luther. "Some giant crow. You get some weird things living in the Bad Woods." Tsar frowned and hung the feather from his belt. "I've never seen a bird as big as this one must be," said Tsar grumpily. "It's all nonsense," smiled Luther. "Only a brainless fool like you wouldn't know that. Witches were destroyed forever." Caliburn flapped downward and landed on Tsar's head. "Forever is a long word," said the raven. "You see," said Tsar triumphantly, "Caliburn is a bird of omen who can see into the future and into the past, and he doesn't think the witches are gone forever." "All I know is, if witches were not to be extinct for some reason, you wouldn't want to go meeting one in a dark place," said Caliburn, shivering. "What do you want a witch for, Tsar?" "I'm going to catch the witch," said Tsar, "and remove its magic and use it for myself." There was another horrified silence. Eventually, Luther spoke. "That, little brother, is the worst plan I have ever heard in the whole history of plan-making." "You're just jealous you didn't think of it," said Tsar. "I have a few questions," said Luther. "How are you going to catch the witch in the first place?" "That's what the net's for," said Tsar, taking a net out of his rucksack and holding it up. You couldn't fault his enthusiasm, at least. "One of us will volunteer to be wounded ever so slightly, and then the blood will attract the witch." "Oh, great," smiled Luther. "Now you're going to wound one of your sad little followers in a forest stuffed with raving werewolves and blood-sniffing ogre breath. Come on, you're completely crazy. This plan is as pathetic as you are." Tsar ignored him. "And then I'll entangle the witch in this net when it attacks. Next question?" "OK, question 2, said Luther. "No living wizard has ever seen a witch, so how do you know what one looks like?" Tsar opened his rucksack and took out a book the size of a large atlas entitled The Spelling Book. Every wizard is equipped with a spelling book given to them at birth. Tsar's was looking extremely worse for wear. One part of it was invisible. It accidentally got dropped in invisibility potion. Another bit was burned so black you could barely read it. This happened when Tsar set the wizard camp on fire, and many of the pages were loose and dropping out all over the place. Too many adventures to go into here. Tsar opened the book to the contents page, which had the 26 letters of the alphabet written on it in very large gold script. Tsar spelled out witches by tapping on each letter in turn, and the book turned its own pages, which seemed to go on forever and ever and ever, the chapters in front turning invisible as the book riffled through the rest of them like an endless pack of cards, until eventually they stopped at the right place. "That's weird. It doesn't say what they look like. But they're green, I think," said Tsar. Someone else thought witches could turn invisible and they had acid blood. Another that they squirted that blood through their eyes. "I'm sure we'll recognise one when we see it," said Tsar, impatiently shutting the spelling book. "They're supposed to be pretty horrible, aren't they?"
"Awesomely horrible," said Caliburn gravely. "The most terrifying creatures that ever walked this earth."
"So even if you do catch this witch, how are you persuaded to part with its magic?"
asked Luther.
I'm imagining that invisible green acid blood-squirting witches that are the most terrifying creatures that ever walked this earth will not give up their magic if you ask them pretty please.
Aha, said Tsar craftily. I've thought of that. With a grand flourish, he put on some gloves, reached into his rucksack, and took out a small saucepan. Silence again.
You do realise that's a saucepan,
said Luther. This is no ordinary saucepan, said Tsar cunningly. And then he took a deep breath before he made his shocking announcement.
This particular saucepan is made out of iron.
Most of the wizards took a horrified step backwards. The sprites let out shrieks of alarm. Luther alone refused to be impressed. In fact, he laughed so hard Tsar thought he might fall over.
This is too good. You're going to fight a witch with a saucepan, sneered Luther. You're no great leader, Tsar. You're a liar and a loser. Our father is ashamed of you. And now I know why you're so keen to steal magic from a witch. There's a spelling competition at the winter celebration tonight, and you can't do magic. Tsar can't do magic, taunted Luther. Tsar turned red with embarrassment, then white with anger. The fact he couldn't do magic yet was one of those hidden sores that you didn't want anyone else to see. Wizard children were not born magic. Their magic came in when they were about 12. Tsar was 13, and his magic still had not come in. Tsar had tried doing magic. For countless hours he had tried. Really simple things like moving stuff with his mind. But it was as if it were a muscle he didn't really have. Relax, everyone said. Relax and it will happen. But it was like trying to move something with arms that weren't there. And recently he had been beginning to worry. What if it never happened? It was an unlikely calamity, but what a disgrace to the whole family it would be if a child had been born to the king enchanter who had no magic. The thought of it made him feel a little sick. Poor little baby Tsar, crooned Luther cruelly. Thinks he's such a big boy, but he can't do any magic whatsoever.
My magic will come in, hissed Tsar.
But in the meantime,
I swear, he spat, eyes so small with anger that he could barely see out of them. I swear I'm going to catch a witch, and I will squeeze so much magic out of that witch, Luther, that I will blast you out of existence.
Oh, yeah?
Grinned Luther. He reached into his rucksack and took out one of his staffs. A wizard's staff was about the size of a walking stick, and wizards concentrated magic through them.
Your spelling won't work on me when I am carrying iron,
roared Tsar, rushing forward to hit Luther with the saucepan. Which was perfectly true, but, most unfortunately, in his charge forward, Tsar tripped over a long tangle of bramble, and his gloved hands lost their grip on the saucepan, and it went sailing over Luther's head and into the undergrowth. Luther pointed his staff at Tsar and whispered the word of a spell under his breath. Luther's body trembled as the magic quivered through him and channeled out of his hand into the staff, which concentrated it into one quick, fierce, hot bolt of magic that blasted out of the end of the staff, hitting Tsar on the legs. Tsar stopped mid-charge, his feet stuck to the ground by Luther's spell.
Ha 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 ha!
Laughed Luther's followers. Remove the spell! Shouted Tsar, struggling to shift his feet, but it was as if they had turned to lead.
No, I don't think I will, smiled Luther.
Tsar lost his temper. He snapped his fingers. Before anyone could blink or think, King Cat launched himself at Luther, huge jaws agape, 60 stone of greeny-grey killing machine. Screaming in terror, Luther was pinned up against a tree trunk, looking aghast at the great cat's nightmare face inches away from his own, and what felt like 4 kitchen knives sinking into his shoulder. They had already drawn blood. None of Luther's own sprites or animals had time to move or protect him.
One more click of my fingers, spat Tsar, and King Cat will take off your head. Cheat, panted Luther. You cheated. You're not supposed to use your animals to attack a fellow wizard.
Remove the spell, shouted Tsar. Lutar was now every bit as angry as Tsar himself, but what could he do? He pointed his staff at Tsar and removed the spell so that Tsar's feet could move, and then Tsar made a signal to King Cat to let Lutar go.
"You're mad, a lunatic!"
raged Lutar as King Cat dropped him, and Lutar gazed in astonishment at the 4 neat bleeding puncture wounds in his shoulder.
"Your animal has bitten me. If you dare to enter that spelling competition, I am going to annihilate you."
Lutar turned to Tsar's followers.
"Who wants to come with me rather than staying here with this silly little madman and his stupid witch trap?"
shouted Lutar. One by one, Tsar's followers backed away from Tsar and towards Lutar, and climbed on board their wolves or snowcats, muttering things like, "Sorry, Tsar, this is a bit too crazy, even for you, and if witches aren't extinct, they are bad magic, Tsar. We shouldn't be here."
"You see,"
crowed Lutar triumphantly,
"a great leader has to have someone to lead, and no one wants to follow a magicless lunatic. Good luck with meeting your witch, loser boy."
And then Lutar rode away on the back of his wolf, followed by most of the other wizards.
"Cowards!"
roared Tsar, nearly crying, he was so angry. He ran into the undergrowth to retrieve the saucepan and shook his fist at their departing backs.
"We'll show you! We'll catch a witch! We'll take magic from it, and then we'll be so magic we'll fly without wings!"
Tsar turned with a sigh to the bedraggled remains of his followers. Why did Lutar always have to spoil everything? Tsar had hardly anyone left now. Only 3 young wizards whose magic hadn't come in either. A girl called Heliotrope and 2 boys, Rush and Darkish, a large lad with even larger ears who had reached the age of 17 without showing any signs of magic whatsoever, and who was slightly on the dim side.
"Bother! He's left me with the losers,"
tutted Tsar.
"Here, I say, Tsar, that's a bit unfair,"
protested Rush.
"Will we really fly without wings?"
said Darkish, flapping his big arms up and down.
"Of course we will,"
promised Tsar, rubbing his hands together excitedly, for Tsar could never stay down for long.
"Those cowards are going to be so sorry they left. Darkish, you're the biggest, so you need to do the most digging," ordered Tsar. "Rush, I'm afraid we're going to have to wound you a little to tempt the witch into the trap, and if anything goes wrong—" "I thought you said this mission was completely safe," said Rush, suspiciously.
"Well, nothing is entirely safe," Tsar backtracked quickly. "Life is dangerous, isn't it? After all, you could get killed just climbing a tree like I nearly was just now."
"This is not just climbing a tree," spluttered Caliburn from above as the 3 young wizards began to obey Tsar's orders.
"This is intentionally trespassing on warrior territory, trying to set a trap for the scariest life form that has ever walked this planet."
Caliburn sighed. Nobody was going to listen to him. Caliburn perched rigid on the tree branch with his head under his wing, as if, for as long as he buried his head under there, if he couldn't see the future would not happen. But of course the old bird knew that would not work. 2. A warrior called Wish. Meanwhile, a stout and terrified warrior pony, with 2 young warriors sitting on its back, had set out secretly from Iron Warrior Fort under cover of darkness. Warriors were not supposed to leave the fort after nightfall, for the warriors were petrified of the magic that was out in the forest. Iron Warrior Fort was the largest hill fort you could possibly imagine, with 13 watchtowers and encircled by 7 great ditches cut into the hill. How scared these warriors must be of everything that is magic to have built such a mighty fort, white as bone, with little slit windows like the blink of a malevolent cat. But nonetheless, this particular warrior pony had managed to sneak out without the nervous sentries that clanked their way along the fort walls spotting it. And perhaps, just perhaps, those sentries were right to be anxiously straining their eyes into the endless green wilderness that surrounded and engulfed them, watching, peering, struggling to see what might be out there. For something bad was watching the pony from high up in the treetops. It is too early to tell what that something was. Many bad things live in the Badwoods. It could have been a cat monster. It could have been a werewolf. It could have been a roger. Rogers are a bit like ogres, but a lot more scary. Time will tell what it was. But it wasn't surprising that the pony had caught the something's attention. For the pony was cantering far too noisily through the undergrowth, and bumping along on its back were a skinny little warrior princess and her assistant bodyguard, Bodkin. They were wearing red cloaks over their armour, which made them shine out like stars in the dark green forest. Short of wearing a big archery target on the top of their heads, or a sign saying, "Eat me, O hungry monsters of the bad woods," nothing could really have made them stand out more. The princess had a very long and regal name, but everybody called her Wish. Warrior princesses, of course, ought to be impressively tall and absolutely terrifying, like Wish's mother, Queen Sycorax. But Wish was neither scary nor large. She had a curious little face that was rather too interested in the world around her, and hair that stuck out too wispily, as if she'd accidentally hit some unnoticed bit of static electricity. A black patch covered her right eye. She seemed to be searching for something with the other.
"We're not supposed to come out here on our own in the day, let alone in the night time,"
said Bodkin, the assistant bodyguard, looking nervously over his shoulder. Bodkin wasn't the regular bodyguard of this weird little princess. Her proper bodyguard had fallen ill with a nasty autumn cold. Bodkin had landed the highly sought-after role as understudy for a royal bodyguard, even though he was only 13 years old, because he was very studious, and he had come out top of his class in the advanced arts of bodyguarding exams. However, this was the first time he had done the actual job, and he was finding it a good deal harder than he had thought it would be. The princess wouldn't do what she was told, for starters, and although he studied very hard, to be honest, Bodkin didn't really like fighting very much, and the thought that he might actually be in a real situation where there was a possibility of violence was making him feel a little sick.
"There could be werewolves or cat monsters or giants out here," said Bodkin. "And then there's the bears and the jaguars and the wizards and the roger breaths, and even dwarves can get nasty when they're hunting in packs."
"Oh, don't be so gloomy, Bodkin," replied the princess. "We'll go back as soon as we find my pet. This is all your fault anyway. You frightened him when you said you'd report him to my mother, and so he completely panicked and ran away."
"I was only trying to stop you from getting into any more trouble," said Bodkin. "You're not allowed pets. They're against the warrior rules."
Bodkin was a boy who really believed in the rules. He was hoping to work his way up from being an assistant bodyguard to a household defender, and you didn't do that by breaking any rules.
"And you're most particularly not allowed this kind of pet."
"He must be terrified," worried Wish. "We couldn't possibly leave him running away all on his own in the terrors of the bad woods, all alone and scared, and he might be being chased by raving fangmouths or something."
"Aha!"
she said with triumphant relief. "There he is!" She hauled on the pony's reins to bring him to a halt and picked up something that was scurrying through the undergrowth. "Thank goodness!" She stroked whatever it was gently and made soothing noises, as if to say, "Don't worry, it's fine, you're safe now, you're with me." The sort of noises that might calm a petrified dog or cat or rabbit that had been running scared and all alone through the bad woods after the setting of the autumn sun. The pet was not a dog, or a cat, or even a rabbit.
"That pet of yours is a spoon,"
objected Bodkin. The assistant bodyguard was right. The pet was, indeed, a large iron dinner spoon. "So he is," said Wish, as if she'd only just noticed, getting back up on the pony and drying off the spoon with the end of her sleeve.
"And that spoon is alive, Princess, it's alive,"
said Bodkin, giving a little shiver of horror as he looked at the spoon.
"Which means that it is an entirely banned magic enchanted object. Haven't you seen the signs all over Warrior Fort? Absolutely no magic, no enchanted objects, no animals indoors. All magic must be reported to a higher authority so that reports can be made and the magic got rid of."
"I'm not sure he's magic exactly," said Wish hopefully. "Just a little bendy."
"Of course he's magic," snapped Bodkin. "Ordinary spoons do not jump up and down to get you to stroke them. Ordinary spoons just lie quietly and feed you your dinner. Look at this one. It's bowing to me. So he is, said Wish proudly. Isn't that clever?
Bodkin breathed very heavily indeed.
This is not clever. This is breaking so many rules it is difficult to know where to begin. Where did you find this spoon? He just turned up in my room one day, like a wild mouse or something. So I fed him some milk, and he's been hanging out with me ever since. Which was nice, because before he came, I was a bit lonely. Haven't you ever been lonely, Bodkin?
Well, I have actually, admitted Bodkin. Ever since I did so well in the exams and got appointed your personal assistant bodyguard, all the other assistant bodyguards said I'd got above myself and now they're not talking to me. And
hang on a second! That's not the point! The point is, said Bodkin, if an enchanted object turns up unexpectedly in a warrior fort, you really ought to tell your mother, Queen Sycorax, immediately so she can remove its magic, not adopt it as your pet.
At the mention of Queen Sycorax's name, the spoon swayed from side to side as if terror-stricken, and then hopped into Wish's waistcoat, hiding behind her body armour, so that only the bowl that was its face was staring out, lit up with a strange glowing magic light.
Look, you've scared him again, Wish replied. The thing is, I don't think he wants his magic removed.
It's a completely painless process, said Bodkin.
But he doesn't want to do it, said Wish.
All right then, said Bodkin, folding his arms determinedly. In which case you have to let the spoon go, back into the wild.
He belongs out there in this scary jungle with all the other monsters and magic things. These are his people. I am putting my foot down, Princess. You absolutely cannot take him back to the Iron Fort with you. You cannot keep this spoon as your pet. It's against the rules, and you will get in the most terrible trouble if anyone finds out.
Wish looked very sad indeed.
But I kind of identify with the spoon because he's like me. He doesn't fit in with all the other spoons.
He doesn't fit in with the other spoons because he's alive, Princess. He's alive, interrupted Bodkin.
And all the other warriors ignore me, Wish carried on. You and this spoon are my only two friends. If I lose the spoon, that just leaves you.
Well, technically speaking, I can't be your friend either, because you are a princess and I am a servant, and those are the rules, explained Bodkin.
In which case, if I let the spoon go, I will be losing my only friend, said Wish.
Okay, Wish. Bodkin was so upset that he forgot to call her princess. It was time for some stern words.
I like you. I know you mean well, but let's face it, the reason you haven't got any friends is you're a bit weird, and weird doesn't go down well in Warrior Fort. You need to try and be more normal, and the first step to being normal is to get rid of the magic spoon.
Wish tried one last desperate argument.
But my mother has enchanted objects herself, said Wish. What about this then?
To Bodkin's horror, Wish drew a large ornamental sword from her scabbard. It wasn't like an ordinary sword. It had a very dirty, old-fashioned hilt, and even beneath the greenish grime that covered it, you could see that it was beautifully designed, with intertwining leaves and mistletoe, and the leaves of other sacred trees twining all over it. On one side of the blade was carved these words in very fancy, curly, old-fashioned script. Once there were witches. And when Wish turned the blade over, the other side was engraved with, "But I killed them."
Where did you get that sword? Said Bodkin in awed tones. Well, it was quite odd, actually. I found it lying in the main courtyard yesterday afternoon, and it didn't seem to belong to anyone, so I picked it up. Didn't you hear the announcement at breakfast this morning about how a very valuable sword had gone missing from your mother's dungeons? Gasped Bodkin. Didn't you guess it might be this sword? Didn't you wonder if picking things up that don't belong to you might be stealing? Yes, I did, admitted Wish, stroking the sword longingly. But I was just going to hang on to it for a while longer, pretending it was mine. I'm so ordinary, and it's so special, and it would be lovely to own something so special. Don't you think? No, I don't think. Thinking is dangerous. The defenders of the royal household are turning the fort upside down looking for this sword, and you've stolen it, goggled Bodkin. I haven't stolen it. I've only borrowed it. I was just about to give it back, but then you frightened the spoon, and I thought we might need something special to protect us if we were going into the Badwoods on our own. I have a very strong feeling that it might be an enchanted sword," ended Wish triumphantly. "Even my mother has enchanted objects, which means they must be all right." "Your scary mother isn't keeping that sword as a pet," cried Bodkin, waving his long, thin arms around. "You don't keep pets in dungeons. She's locked it up in the dungeons to keep it safe."
Wish looked at the sword in a slightly worried way, as if this was only just occurring to her.
"Oh, yes. Now I come to think of it, you could be right about that. It did seem kind of out of character for my mother. She doesn't really like anything magic, does she?" "Where have you been living for the past 13 years?" cried Bodkin. "There are whopping great signs up all over the fort. You can't have missed them. Your mother loathes the magic. She hates the magic. She has sworn never to rest till she has rid the entire forest of anything magic at all."
Wish furrowed her brow.
"Yes, I have to say, I don't really understand that. Surely just because some magic is bad, it doesn't mean that all magic is bad." "You're not supposed to understand," screeched Bodkin. "You're a warrior. You're not supposed to be asking questions. It's very, very simple. You're just supposed to be obeying the warrior rules."
Wish suddenly looked very dejected. The spoon standing on top of her head drooped.
"Bother, you're right," said Wish sadly. "I've messed up again, haven't I, Bodkin?" "You most certainly have," said Bodkin.
And then he added hurriedly, "Your Highness," for in the excitement of the situation he had forgotten the warrior rules about how to correctly address royalty. This was the problem with Wish. Whenever you spent any time with her, you found yourself breaking rules without even realising it.
"If my mother ever finds out about this, she's going to be hopping mad, isn't she?"
said Wish, even sadder still.
"Absolutely hopping,"
agreed Bodkin, giving a little shiver at the thought of it.
"I wish I was normal like everyone else," said Wish. "What can I do to put everything right again?"
Bodkin gave a sigh of relief, for it looked like at last the princess was seeing sense.
"OK, don't be sad. All is not lost," he said,
giving Wish a little pat on the shoulder to cheer her up.
"You didn't mean to do the wrong thing, but you need to release this spoon into the wild right now and take this sword back to the fort immediately, and you have to stop doing things like this and start behaving like a normal warrior princess and—" "Hang on. What was that?"
There was a sudden noise above them, like the snapping of a twig when something brushes up against it. They had been so busy arguing they had forgotten that they were not in the safety of Iron Warrior Fort, about to tuck into a splendid dinner, for warriors were very keen on their food. They were all alone in the Badwoods, after dark, and for the first time they realised they were being watched. I mentioned, did I not, at the beginning of this chapter that something bad was watching them, quiet and dangerous, up in the treetops. A cold feeling came over the back of Wish's neck, where the hairs pricked up like the quills on a hedgehog. She looked all around, at the black, silent trees, their branches twisting, gnarled like the nobliest of goblins' fingers. She looked up, and she could not see anything. Only perhaps a certain darkening and a shimmering, thickening of the air above them, as if that air was choked with something awful, as indeed it was. And the coldness radiating out of the heart of that shining density was a coldness you have never felt before. Colder than the coldest depths of the northern ocean, colder than icicles, colder than polar caps, colder even than death itself. The freezing mist of the wildwood's ancient past crept under Wish's armour and sank like death into her bones. Was it Wish's imagination, or did the very air above them seem to be grinning? Wish pulled down the visor on her helmet. The spoon hopped up on top of Wish's head and sniffed the air around them. Suddenly he went rigid, as if sensing something terrible, and dived down into Wish's armour to hide.
Run, pony, run! Squealed Wish, and the exhausted little pony started violently and broke into a shambling, terrified, wobbling gallop. Anybody watching would have thought that they were mad, for it looked like they were running away from nothing at all. But there was definitely something very odd going on. Wish and Bodkin could see nothing above them except for dark night sky, stars and trees, but something about the way the tree branches were moving suggested that an invisible presence was hurtling against them. And the air rushing above them was so cold that it burned the top of Wish's forehead, and as the pony galloped faster and faster, the wind blowing directly behind them began to make an odd noise, like no wind that Wish had ever heard before. "Now, you see, Bodkin, aren't you glad I brought the sword with me? I thought we might need it," panted Wish, trying not to panic. "Glad? Glad? We could be sitting right now in front of our dinner, safely in the dining room in Warrior Fort. And I think today it was going to be deer burgers, which is my favourite, and this pony is going in the wrong direction," flapped Bodkin. "The fort is the other way." But whatever it was that was chasing them didn't want them to go back to the fort, so it was chasing them further and further and further into the Badwoods. "Does anyone know we're out here?" cried Bodkin, who had drawn his bow and was shooting desperate arrows upwards, even though he was a terrible shot and he couldn't see what he was shooting at. "Will they send out search parties?" "I'm afraid not," said Wish, squinting upwards, trying to work out what was pursuing them. "Or not till the morning, anyway. I told my mother I was going to bed early with a headache." "Brilliant," said Bodkin. "Brilliant! As it happens, I think I can feel a bit of a headache coming on myself. Don't worry, Princess. You mustn't worry. I'm here to protect you." Wish shook the spoon at whatever was following them. She may have been a somewhat weird warrior princess, but she certainly had courage. "You better not follow us, whatever you are," shouted Wish at the terrifying, screeching nothingness, "for we are armed with an enchanted spoon." "The sword, Princess," murmured Bodkin through white lips. "The sword sounds more scary." "And a sword," shouted Wish, waving the sword in her right hand and the spoon in her left. "A sword so dangerous it was locked in my mother's dungeons." But that, if anything, seemed to encourage whatever was following them even more, for the wind above them gave a hungry whine and rushed after them even faster. "Never fear, Princess!" cried Bodkin, shaking so much with anxiety that he could barely load his bow. "This is a bad situation, but I will save you, for as a personal assistant bodyguard to the Princess, I have been trained in the most advanced arts of bodyguarding." Unfortunately, Bodkin discovered in those desperate moments that he had a terrible disadvantage as a potential bodyguard. He had a medical condition that caused him to fall asleep in situations of extreme danger. He had barely said the last words of that brave speech before he collapsed on the Princess's shoulder, snoring loudly. "Bodkin!" shrieked the Princess. "What are you doing?" "Bodkin!" shrieked Wish. "Wake up now!" Bodkin woke up with a start, mumbling, "Where? What? How?" "Badwoods!" panted the Princess. "Being chased! Something terrible! Advanced art of bodyguarding!" "Oh, yes! I've been carefully trained for exactly these sorts of life-or-death emergencies!" cried Bodkin, fitting another arrow into his bow, and unfortunately falling asleep again at the moment of aiming it, so that he tipped forward and accidentally shot the poor pony in the hindquarters. The pony squealed protestingly as the arrow grazed his bottom and then ran on in wild desperation through the pitch-dark forest. Wish's heart was beating fast like a rabbit's, and she didn't even notice when the brambles shredded her clothes to ribbons and tore long, painful scratches into her legs. The pony came upon an ice-cold stream and forced his way through the briars and splashed down into it, though the cold of the water burned them all like fire, in the hope that whatever was following them would be put off the scent. The pony clambered out the other side and ran on through the darkness. "Oh, murmuring mistletoe," thought Wish in terror. "I should never have done this. Magic is banned for a reason. Warriors are not allowed out after dark for a reason. Iron Warrior Fort is built like it is for a reason." She could feel her heart beating so hard it felt like any moment it would break out of her chest. "Faster! Faster!" urged Wish. So choked with panic she could barely breathe, the pony galloped into a sudden clearing in the forest. The whining of this strange wind had an edge to it now, like the painful scritch of chalk on stone. A sound that grew louder, as if building up to attack. Louder and louder the noise grew. Scritch. There was an extraordinary noise, as if the very air itself was being torn apart like a giant piece of paper. Terrified, Wish turned her face upward to face the attack with her drawn sword. There was a shout from a human voice somewhere behind her, and suddenly everything happened very quickly. 3. The witch feather begins to glow.
OK, I'm getting a little fed up now, said Rush, who was lying, pretending to be wounded in front of a concealed net that was Tsar's witch trap. We've been here for hours.
Make your helps a bit more pathetic, Tsar called out bossily from his hiding place behind a nearby tree. I could wound Rush if you like, grinned Tiffin-Storm, showing little fangs. He looks quite tasty.
I'm fine, thank you,
said Rush hastily.
Face it, Tsar, maybe witches really are extinct like everyone says, and it's getting really late. Frankly, I'm more worried about warriors than I am witches.
Don't worry, said Tsar breezily.
Crusher would tell us if there were any problems, wouldn't you, Crusher?
Crusher's job was hanging onto the rope to pull the net tight when the witch came upon them and keeping lookout. The giant was a long way up, so Tsar had to shout to get his attention.
Said Crusher thoughtfully. There is a bit of a problem, actually,
he admitted. But Tsar could not hear him because the giant was so far away and he spoke so very, very slowly. Giants operate in a slightly different time scale from everyone else. However, it didn't really matter, because Tsar wasn't listening anyway, and the problem that Crusher was thinking about was slightly different from Tsar's idea of a problem. Some people think that because giants talk slowly, they must be stupid, but they could not be more wrong. Giants are big, and they tend to have big thoughts, and Crusher was a long-stepper high-walker giant, one of the deepest thinkers of all. So the problem, thought Crusher, was this. Was there a limit to the expanding universe, or would it go on expanding forever? I told you it was a big problem. If space was infinite, and stars were infinite, thought Crusher, didn't that mean that there must also be infinite numbers of Crushers out there? How was that possible, and what were the implications of that? Which was all very interesting, but unfortunately it did mean that although Crusher was holding vaguely onto the rope, his mind was wandering among the stars, and therefore he was entirely unaware of any approaching danger. A long-stepper high-walker giant does not make the ideal lookout.
Just a little longer, Rush, whispered Tsar, eyes bright. There are witches about. I'm sure I can smell them.
Tsar closed his eyes and sniffed the air. Please, thought Tsar. Please, gods of the trees and the water, you don't know how hard it is growing up in a world full of magic when you have no magic of your own, everybody laughing at you, pitying you. Let that be a witch, because I need to be magic. I want to make my father proud of me. At that very moment, Tsar's sprite sprang hissing out of the darkness to rotate around Tsar's head in a glowing, sprightly halo, eyes blazing suddenly red, hissing like a nest of wasps.
Witches! Witches! Witches!
I knew it, said Tsar in excitement. Draw your wands, sprites. Get your bows ready. We're about to be attacked.
No, we're not, sighed Heliotrope, who was now thoroughly fed up with Tsar and his mad schemes and wanted to go home. Witches are extinct. Everyone knows that. But Rush, lying on the ground, felt the air all around him grow suddenly so cold that he shivered. Tsar called down encouragingly.
Don't move, Rush. You're doing brilliantly. You look very victim-like. The witches are really going to be fooled. Crusher, get ready now.
Silence from above.
Crusher!
Yes, I think I've made a breakthrough,
announced Crusher, thrusting his head down through the tree canopy with snailish slowness in human time, but surprising quickness in giant time, because Crusher was excited.
I'm leaning towards the idea that space might be finite.
Crusher, that's not important right now, and I told you not to think deep thoughts, snapped Tsar, for the process of deep thought made a giant's head smoke and smoulder like a forest fire, and this meant that their exact location could be pinpointed from a considerable distance by, say, enemy warriors or roger breaths, or indeed, witches. "We're being attacked!" shouted Tsar in exasperation.
Oh,
Crusher broke off from his giant daydreams, remembered where he was, and got a good hold on the rope. What nobody noticed in the anxiety of the moment was the great black feather swinging from Tsar's belt. If anyone had been looking at the feather at that moment, they might have noticed that it had begun to glow, dully but ominously in the darkness. I'm sure there's some sort of reasonable and scientific explanation for it. But a crow's feather would not do that, however large the crow. 4. The witch trap catches something. From Tsar's point of view, here is what happened. Tsar was waiting, hiding behind the tree, trembling with excitement. The sprites hummed louder and louder, whirling round his head, screeching, "Witches! Witches! Witches! Witches!" Tsar heard the sound of hoofbeats, and something galloped into the moonlit clearing, too fast to stop, something that, if Tsar could have seen it properly, had the legs of a pony below and human bodies in the middle, and a great indistinct cloud above it. What strange monster was this? Rush was frozen with terror. He could not move. He would be run down. Screech! There was a tearing noise, as if the atmosphere was being ripped apart like paper. And then Tsar's senses were assaulted all at once by the worst smell you could possibly imagine. Rotting corpse and mouldy eggs and dead man 6 weeks gone with unwashed feet and underarm reek, while a splintering scream like the death agony of 500 foxes buried itself in Tsar's brain and reverberated inside his head till he felt like he might go crazy. "What is going on?" thought Tsar, with a tiny part of his mind that could still think. Rush curled up like a little hedgehog, rather pathetically putting his hands over his head, as if it would protect him from whatever horror was making that noise and that smell. Tsar yelled up to Crusher, and then everything happened all at once. The cloud or wind howled louder. Who knew what it was? Maybe Tsar was right and it really was a witch, but whatever it was, it screamed downwards, and at exactly the same time, all 8 of the sprites whacked their spells with their wands, sending the spells whipping towards the centre of the clearing, with white-hot heat like speeding fireflies, and Crusher hauled like crazy on the net, and there was a gigantic explosion. Tsar threw himself flat on his stomach behind the tree to get out of the way. There was a great screeching noise. Something was ricocheting round the clearing, something unusually huge and dark and feathery, and then exiting with a dreadful piercing wail. Clouds of black and green smoke filled the glade, and Tsar got to his feet, coughing. Hanging in the centre of the clearing was his dangling witch trap, Crusher holding on to the other end for dear life. Something was struggling wildly inside, and all around the net was a force field of air, red as blood, red as fiery flame. What on earth just happened, thought Rush, coughing and choking with the remnants of that smell, and unable to believe that he was still alive. "It worked!" gasped Tsar, staggering to his feet, unable to believe his luck. "Oh my goodness, it worked! We've done it! We've really caught a witch! That's its force field! Stop attacking it, sprites, it's pointless!" Sure enough, the sprite's spells shooting out sparks were trying to push their way through the bright red air, but the air turned redder still, and spiky, like living, breathing, flaming thorns. Rush looked at the struggling net and gulped open-mouthed.
"Oh, by mistletoe and all things ivy, maybe Tsar really has done it, and maybe he's caught a witch. Let's get out of here!"
Rush scrambled to his feet, jumped on the back of his snowcat and ran away, as did Heliotrope and Darkish. They assumed that Tsar was going to follow them, but Tsar was about the only boy in the entire world who really was mad enough to stay in a clearing with an actual live witch. "You's brilliant! You's marvellous! You's the best leader in the world! What do we do now, boss?" asked Squeeze Juice nervously.
Even Tsar was now terrified, but he would rather die than admit this to his sprites and his animals.
Surround the witch,
ordered Tsar. Complaining loudly, the sprites nonetheless surrounded the net in a burning circle, and Tsar forced himself to put one foot in front of another and approach the net, his hands so sweaty with fear he nearly dropped the very small saucepan. The smell in the clearing was so chokingly bad, it was like swimming through a disgusting sulphurous soup. Tsar stood underneath the net, staring up at it slowly swinging above them, back and forth, back and forth. Rather unexpectedly, the 4 distinctive legs of a horse were dangling down from the holes in the net.
Wow, breathed Tsar. Who would have thought it? Witches aren't like birds, they're more like centaurs.
"Okay, witch," shouted Tsar, trying to make his voice sound scary and waving the saucepan threateningly in one trembling hand.
"Don't try anything stupid. We have you completely surrounded, and I am armed with a weapon made of iron."
There was a short silence, and then a small, shaky voice from inside the net said, "I'm not a witch. Witches are extinct. Everyone knows that. Why are you attacking us? What do you want?"
"Well, of course, a witch isn't going to admit it's a witch, is it?" said Tsar. "Don't you try and trick me, witch."
"I'm not trying to trick you," said the voice, less shaky now and more indignant. "My name is Wish, not Witch. Even if witches did exist, they're supposed to be green, aren't they? With acid blood and feathers and everything." There was another pause.
"Well, what kind of monster are you then?" demanded Tsar. "Are you some kind of centaur?"
No, said the voice. "That's just my pony. I think he may have fainted. Me and my friend Bodkin were going through the forest and something suddenly started chasing us. Let us go!" Botheration. It wasn't a witch after all. It had all been for nothing. His horrible superior older brother had been right all along, and the entire evening had been a waste of time.
"Let whatever it is down, Crusher," sighed Tsar, flattened by pulverizing disappointment.
Slowly, Crusher let down the net. The pony had not fainted, poor thing. It had been hit by one of Tiffin-Storm's sleep-inducing curses, and it lay on the ground, snoring loudly. But Tsar saw that there were humans in the net too. A small human dressed head to toe in armour who scrambled up from the snoring pony and stepped out of the net, waving a large ornamental sword, and behind the teeny little human, a slightly larger human, skinny as a rake and also encased entirely in armour, who was stumbling to his feet as if he was just waking up. We know that these 2 humans were Wish and Bodkin. Bodkin was the taller one, and Wish was the little one with the sword. But Tsar had never met a warrior before, and he could never imagine that Wish and Bodkin might be heroes of this story, just like he was himself. All Tsar saw was that these were 2 humans wearing iron breastplates and carrying iron swords, which meant they must be warriors, and Tsar had been brought up to hate the warriors like poison, because they were the enemy. Excellent. After lurching this way and that from fear to excitement to disappointment, Tsar was spoiling for a nice straightforward fight. If he couldn't catch a witch, at least he could kill an enemy.
"Warriors!"
cried Tsar fiercely, narrowing his gaze, getting a good grip on his saucepan, and he drew a heavy oak staff from his rucksack. "Warriors, warriors, warriors!" hissed the sprites, burning red with anger. "Kill them, kill them, kill them!" "It's a wizard, and it's creatures!" cried Bodkin in alarm, pointing at Tsar and leaping protectively in front of Wish. "And they look aggressive!" They certainly did, and Wish stared around, petrified at the burning sprites, on fire with fury, flames licking off their long limbs, sparks spitting all over the place, the growling wolves, bear and snowcats showing their teeth, and way, way above them, the gigantic figure of the giant in the background. They were hopelessly outnumbered, and giants were supposed to eat people. Sprites could magic you into a slow death, and one look at those snowcats told you they could tear you to pieces. Wish had an enchanted sword, but she knew she wasn't a very good sword fighter, and let's face it, Bodkin hadn't been much help as a bodyguard so far. They didn't have a chance. "Don't worry, Princess," shouted Bodkin bravely. "I'll deal with them." Bodkin drew his spear and shook his sword. He advanced in a menacing manner. He caught sight of the giant. He stopped dead in his furiously warlike pose. He blinked twice, and then his eyes closed, his head flopped forward, and he slowly toppled over like a falling tree, accidentally chopping his spear in half with his sword as he fell. And he lay there, with his mouth open. Tsar looked down at the fallen Bodkin in astonishment. Was this a trick?
"Snowcats, wolves, cover me,"
ordered Tsar. Their fur bristling, the animals circled round Tsar, ready to pounce.
"Bear, cover the guy on the ground. He may be faking."
The bear put a big bare paw on Bodkin's chest and sat on him.
"Sprites, leave this to me. I'll show these wicked warriors that we wizards know how to fight,"
cried Tsar, and he launched himself at Wish, saucepan in one hand, staff in the other. Wish parried Tsar's thrust with the enchanted sword, and the fight began. Wish found that fighting with an enchanted sword made things a lot easier than fighting with a normal sword. The enchanted sword could anticipate where the next saucepan thrust or lunge from Tsar's staff was coming from and throw itself in the way of that thrust, dragging Wish with it. The sword jerked her this way and that, with Wish gripping onto it with both hands for all the world as if she were hanging onto the tail of a wild bull. Caliburn was in a frenzy of worry, and he flapped about the fighters' heads, squeaking, "The enchanted sword! Be really careful with that enchanted sword! Don't let it touch you! There's something wrong with it!"
"An enchanted sword?"
breathed Tsar.
"Impossible!"
How could a warrior be fighting with an enchanted sword? Warriors didn't use magic. The enchanted sword made a sweeping lunge forward, and this thrust finally disarmed Tsar. His staff went spinning into the undergrowth, followed by the saucepan.
"Do you surrender?"
said Wish, holding the enchanted sword above Tsar's head.
"I surrender,"
said Tsar from between gritted teeth.
"Don't trust them! Wizards are tricksters!"
shouted Bodkin, who had woken up from his faint but was still trapped beneath the bear. Wish ignored this instruction and instead relaxed, stepped back, and lowered the sword. Which was a mistake. Bodkin was right. Tsar was not to be trusted.
"King Cat, Night Eye, attack!"
shouted Tsar as soon as the sword was lowered. King Cat leapt in and smashed Wish down to the ground. The force of the blow knocked the enchanted sword out of Wish's hand, and as soon as it left her grip, the enchantment left it. The sword went dead and fell to the forest floor, as cold and lifeless as a normal sword. Tsar picked it up, and 60 stone of powder-blue giant lynx in the form of King Cat leaned on Wish's chest and cracked open her helmet with its jaws, like a nutcracker cracking a nut. The two halves of the helmet fell away, and Tsar was looking straight into the face of an odd-looking little girl with a patch over one eye.
"It's a girl,"
said Tsar in surprise. The sprites laughed uproariously at this.
"Tsar was being beaten by a girl."
Wish was looking straight into the face of a snarling snowcat and a wizard boy who was holding the enchanted sword over her head in a purposeful fashion.
"And now," said the wizard boy, "do you surrender?"
5. When bad stars cross and worlds collide.
"I most certainly will not surrender," said Wish. "You cheated." "Wizards don't play by warrior rules," said Tsar. "Cheat of a wizard, wickedness of a warrior, curse maker, forest poisoner, child eater, magic destroyer. May you be ground by the teeth of the great grey ogre into pieces that are smaller than the eyes of lice on a fly," cursed Tsar.
Both Tsar and Wish were cold and tired and had just had a terrible fright. Fear had turned to anger, as it so often will, and they settled easily into shouting the kind of insults and nasty language at each other that had been exchanged between wizards and warriors since the warriors first invaded from across the seas and the two sets of humans met in battle in the wild woods centuries before. Tsar's face was flushed with temper, and he held the sword over Wish's head in such a purposeful fashion that Bodkin shouted out,
"Don't kill her! She's the daughter of Queen Sycorax, and if you kill her, Queen Sycorax's revenge will be terrible."
Tsar stared at Wish in astonishment.
"A daughter of Queen Sycorax? But you can't be."
Queen Sycorax was a legend in the forest, known for her cruelty and height and her pitiless warrior strength.
How could this tiny matchstick of a girl be scary Queen Sycorax's daughter? A daughter of Queen Sycorax! Kill her! Kill her! Kill her! Kill her! Hissed the sprites, creeping through the air towards Wish, their bows loaded with the most deadly of their curses. One word from Tsar, and they would let them fly. Tsar had always boasted that if he ever met an enemy he would kill them instantly. But boasts are one thing, and actually killing a real live girl your own age who is right in front of you and clearly terrified, though trying not to be, with a sword you have just cheated her out of, well, that's quite another. And Tsar found he could not do it. My ancestors would have done it, thought Tsar guiltily. Luther would not have hesitated. But Tsar paused uncertainly. And then, to his further surprise, he found himself being attacked by what appeared to be a spoon, making ferocious lunges and rapping him painfully on the head. "I'll call off my spoon if you call off your bear," panted Wish. To the disappointment of the sprites, who were hissing like hornets, Tsar lowered the enchanted sword and gave a sign to his bear, who let Bodkin go with a grunt. The enchanted spoon stopped rapping Tsar on the head, gave him a small, apologetic bow, and hopped back down to Wish. The wizard and the warriors stared at each other in amazement, still hostile and suspicious, but also curious. "I am Wish, daughter of Sycorax, Queen of the Warriors," said Wish, "and this is my assistant bodyguard, Bodkin. Who are you?" "I am Tsar the Magnificent, son of Encanzo, King of the Wizards," said Tsar. "These are my companions, my wolves, my bear, my snow cats, King Cat, Night Eye, Forest Heart, my bird, Caliburn, my giant, Crusher, and my sprites, Ariel, Mustard Thought, Tiffinstorm, Hinky Punk, Time Loss." The sprites weaved viciously around the warriors' heads, sparking and burning menacingly. "Don't forget us," squeaked Squeeze-Juice. "Oh, yes, these are sprites too, but they're so young we call them hairy fairies," said Tsar. "Bumbleboozle and the baby—" "Squeeze-Juice," whispered Squeeze-Juice into Bodkin's ear, suddenly and alarmingly. The long trail of his antenna sent goosebumps all over Bodkin's scalp as Bodkin flapped him desperately away. Wish gave a sigh of jealousy as she looked at Tsar's companions, particularly the sprites. She reached out a hand to the one Tsar called Squeeze-Juice, which was a funny-looking little thing, furry as a bumblebee. I'm afraid that Squeeze-Juice bit her. "Wow," said Wish, sucking her finger. "Sprites are tougher than I expected. They're kind of violent, and they don't seem to like me very much." "Of course they don't like you, you stupid warrior," said Tsar. "Your wicked mother captures our giants and dwarves and sprites in her terrible traps, and then we never see them again." "But my mother doesn't kill the sprites she captures," said Wish. "She just has this stone that takes away magic that she keeps in her dungeons, and all she does is mercifully remove their magic by placing them upon the stone." Wish's voice trailed off as she remembered how much she didn't want the spoon to have his magic removed. "In a completely painless process," Bodkin prompted her.
"You think that does not kill them?"
hissed Tiffinstorm.
"Why not just remove their hearts entirely? A sprite without its magic is a sprite who has lost its soul."
Oh dear. Wish did not know what to think now. This all sounded so sad.
"But the magic is bad for them," she said, falteringly. "And they use it to curse us. And giants eat people. That's why my mother traps them. She told me so."
Tsar and the sprites laughed at such ignorance.
"Giants don't eat people."
Wish looked up at the giant in wonder. And then, to Bodkin's horror, the giant leaned down and very gently picked Wish up in his giant fingers and lifted her into the air. It should have been frightening. But the giant moved so slowly, and his fingers around her were so comfortingly huge, that all Wish felt as she rose up into the treetops was excitement at the new experience.
"Look around you and look down," said the giant. "What seems important from up here?"
Wish looked over the edge of the giant's fingers and caught her breath with the surprise of seeing the world from an entirely different viewpoint. The forest canopy stretched out for miles in every direction, and the night sky above was crammed with stars that went on forever. Down below, the humans were as small as sprites, and the sprites were just glowing flecks of dust. One of the humans, Bodkin, was shouting something. "Put her down!" But it was such a long way away, Wish had trouble hearing him, and his anxiety seemed from this vantage point mistaken and missing the point. "The forest is important," said Wish, "and the stars."
Correct, smiled the giant. Look into my eyes, said the giant. Do I look like the kind of person who would eat human beings?
The giant's face was covered with a network of wrinkles and laughter lines like the wandering paths on an old map, and his eyes were kind and wise. "No," said Wish, "you don't."
Correct again, said the giant. Unlike ogres, giants are vegetarian.
Crusher grinned and pulled up a small tree. He gave a huge smile at Wish as the entire tree disappeared into his enormous mouth, crunching whole branches as if they were mere twigs.
Better for the digestion, he said dreamily.
The first seeds of doubt about all that she had been told about magic creatures were sown in Wish's mind when she looked up at the giant's kind face, laughing so loudly at his own bad joke. "Crusher doesn't seem like a good name for you," said Wish.
It's short for problem crusher, said Crusher.
"Are you all right?" cried Bodkin anxiously. "Of course I'm all right," said Wish as the giant gently put her back down. "That giant really is not dangerous." Was it possible that warriors had been mistaken in their view of the magic all along? Could there be another way of looking at things other than the warrior way? Wish's world view was spinning upside down, and that is always a difficult moment. "Don't listen to them, Princess," said Bodkin. "They're putting a spell on us. They're trying to make us see things from their point of view." Tsar was looking equally thoughtful.
Warriors want to destroy all magic, he frowned, gazing at the enchanted sword he was holding in his hand. Surely a warrior princess shouldn't have magic objects.
"No, she shouldn't," said Bodkin. "I have been saying that for some time." "Be careful with that enchanted sword, Tsar," urged Caliburn. "There's something wrong with it. I can feel it in my feathers." Staring at the blade, Tsar suddenly realized Caliburn was right. There was indeed something odd about the sword, something so strange and out of the ordinary and downright uncanny that he nearly dropped it in his excitement.
"Oh my goodness, Caliburn!" gasped Tsar. "I don't believe this. This is incredible. I'll tell you what's wrong with this sword. It's made out of iron. And so is the enchanted spoon. They are iron and magic mixed together."
Unbelievable. Inconceivable. "Impossible," gasped Caliburn.
"Where did you get this sword?"
breathed Tsar, turning it over and over in his hands. "I found it in the corridor, but it's an enchanted sword, so I think it's made its way out of my mother's dungeons on its own," said Wish, her heart sinking. "That's not your sword, Tsar. It belongs to my mother. Give it back right now." Wish made a grab for the sword, and Tsar whisked it out of her reach, Night Eye stepping between them and growling warningly so she couldn't get any closer.
"Hang on a second," said Tsar. "What's that?"
Tsar noticed for the first time the words written on the blade. "Once there were witches." The hair stood up on the back of his neck. Tsar turned the sword over and read the words on the other side. "But I killed them." After the word "them," there was an arrow that pointed to the tip of the sword, where something was now glistening. A single drop of green blood. The three humans looked at the green stain, slightly smoking. "Don't touch it!" screeched Caliburn. 6. Be careful what you wish for.
The three youngsters, the bird, the sprites, and the animals stared at that single drop of green blood with growing horror, and in Tsar's case, excitement.
Witch blood, said Tsar in delight. What do you mean, witch blood? Protested Bodkin. Witches are extinct.
But he did not scoff as convincingly as he might have done had he been tucked snugly behind the 7 ditches of the Warrior Hill fort. There was something about the bad woods after dark, when the hair ice, a sprite word for fine strands of ice that form on dead woods in freezing conditions, was prickling and growing all over each twisting twig of dead wood that made one fear that possibly, just possibly, witches might not be so extinct after all.
"This is a witch-killing sword," said Tsar. "Look, it says so on the blade, and it found its way out of your warrior dungeons because it sensed that the witches were waking once more in the wood."
"That's not possible," said Bodkin.
"Although it is true," said Wish slowly, "that just before Tsar caught us in that trap, we were being attacked by something, and I think I may have wounded the something with the sword."
"You were being attacked by a witch, and that is witch blood," smiled Tsar.
"No, it isn't. Lots of things have green blood," said Bodkin. "Cat monsters, roger breaths, green teeth goblins, green teeth ogres. It can't be a witch because witches are extinct."
"Probably extinct," corrected Caliburn.
"Definitely not extinct,"
said Tsar, pointing to the centre of the clearing. There, right beside Tsar's witch trap, was another black feather, a feather like a crow's, but significantly larger. Tsar picked it up. As the feather came close to the other feather that was hanging around Tsar's belt, both feathers began to glow, a dull greeny glow, a glow of ominous magic. And as Tsar held the feather up to the tip of the sword, the stain glowed too, like the luminescence of a firefly, but with a spookier green tinge to it.
"Witches,"
grinned Tsar. There was a terrible silence. Witches might have returned to the Badwoods, the most dreadful creatures ever to have walked the earth, alive once more. The two enemy groups, animals and sprites, stepped a little closer to one another, looking out at the dark forest all around them, joining in mutual horror at what might possibly be out there.
"If that really is witch blood, it probably isn't, but if it is, even that single drop is very, very dangerous," shivered Caliburn. "Wipe it off on that tree bark, Tsar, before it hurts anyone."
"Oh, I'm not going to waste it," said Tsar. "There must have been a reason that I caught someone called Wish in my witch trap. What are the chances of that happening? I wish to be magic, and the universe is trying to tell me that it's granted me my wish."
"It could be telling you something else. The universe is very complicated," shrieked Caliburn. "It could be testing you. It could be warning you not to make wishes as foolish as that one."
But Tsar was not listening to Caliburn. Here was fate showing him the way to get magic out of a witch.
"Don't touch that, Tsar!"
shouted Caliburn, so anxious that the feathers dropped out of him like black rain.
"Don't touch it! Don't touch it! Don't touch it!"
hissed the sprites. But Tsar reached out the palm of his hand and pressed it hard against the tip of the sword where the green drop of blood was glistening. He scratched it once, twice, in the shape of the first letter of his name, X. And from that moment, Tsar's story took a different path, a path that would be very difficult to come back from.
"No!"
begged Caliburn. It was too late. Too late. Too late. The tip of the enchanted sword pierced Tsar's hand, and he screamed and doubled over in pain, holding his hand to his stomach. Caliburn took his wings away from his eyes.
"Oh, Tsar, what have you done?"
Tsar straightened up. His eyes were alight with excitement, although the pain of it was making him shiver and shake his hand like it had been burned. "Too late," grinned Tsar, holding up his hand, and there, in the centre of it, was the witch blood mixed with his blood in the shape of an X. When bad stars cross and worlds collide,
X marks the spot. What did he do that for? Asked Wish.
I'm going to use the witch blood to perform magic, said Tsar confidently.
Will it work? Asked Wish. He has absolutely no idea, said Caliburn. Do you think that Tsar is the sort of person who thinks things through? We don't know what that green stuff is. You better hope it isn't witch blood, Tsar, because witch blood is supposed to be exceptionally dangerous. You may be able to use it to perform magic, but it could turn you over to the dark side. You might become one of the witch's creatures. Your father would lose his kingship.
Caliburn was even more agitated than normal.
But I have to admit, he said, cheering up a smidgen, it is much more likely not to be witch blood after all. There are plenty of things with green blood in the Bad Woods. It could be werewolf blood, and that would just turn you into a werewolf.
Bother, said Tsar, shaking his hand a little more uncomfortably. I never thought of that.
Which would be inconvenient, said Caliburn. All that not going out after midnight and howling at the moon and extra body hair and everything, but it wouldn't be the end of the world.
It would be great, squealed Squeezejuice. You'd be all furry like me. Oh, please, turn into a werewolf, Tsar. Turn into a werewolf.
But Tsar didn't look that happy about the idea of turning into a werewolf, and Wish and Bodkin took a step backward, just in case.
And it may just be Roga breath blood. That doesn't have any effect at all, as far as we know. You're right, said Caliburn. I shall look on the positive side. Let's hope it's just Roga breath blood. In which case we shouldn't really be hanging around here, because don't forget, Roga breaths do try and follow you if they've wounded you to get their blood back.
How do they do that?
Asked Bodkin in horror. You don't want to know, said Caliburn. Let's just say they're kind of attached to their blood, so their methods of recovering it aren't pretty.
Well, whatever you say, I'm still hoping it's witch blood, said Tsar, obstinately. But even if it isn't, I still have the sword, don't I?
Tsar hung the sword from his belt. Not to be recommended. A sword should always be put safely away in a scabbard, but Tsar was not someone who worried much about health and safety.
That's not your sword, said Wish. Give us back our sword.
Sword?
Said Tsar, innocently opening his eyes wide.
What sword?
The enchanted sword that belongs to my mother and is presently shoved into your belt, said Wish.
Oh, that sword, said Tsar, vaulting onto King Cat's back. That sword has been given to me by fate, so I can be the boy of destiny and lead my people to fight back against you warriors. You can't argue with fate.
It hasn't been given to you by fate, yelled Wish. You're stealing it. Give us back our sword, you burglar.
Tsar ignored her and turned to the others.
Come on, everyone. We need to get back so I can beat Luther in the spelling competition.
Hang on a second. What about us? Asked Wish. We can't go home, can we? Your sprite spells have sent my pony to sleep.
The pony was, indeed, still snoring peacefully in the centre of the clearing.
Well, you really shouldn't have gone out in the Bad Woods after dark if you didn't want anything bad to happen, advised Tsar,
with sheer, unbelievable Tsar-like cheek. At that moment, there was a distant sound of stamping horse feet and a cry of dogs, and the sprites hissed in alarm, "Warriors!" Queen Sycorax's iron warriors had spotted the giant in their Bad Woods territory. Tsar had been right about the deep thoughts, the smoke, and were galloping out of Iron Warrior Fort to investigate.
There you are, your problem is solved, said Tsar to Wish. Your people are coming and they can take you home.
But we'll be in big trouble because we sneaked out of the fort without permission, said Wish. Please, will you help us get back to our own fort without them finding us?
I haven't got time to do that before the competition starts, said Tsar. But I'll very kindly let you come with me, and you can stay the night in my room in Wizard Camp.
That's burglary and kidnap, said Wish furiously. Take us back to Iron Warrior Fort and give me back my sword, you horrible wizard.
Well, I really don't see what that's got to do with me, said Tsar in surprise. Why should I care about the problems of a couple of enemy warriors? I'm doing my best, but you're being very difficult.
If Wish had been doubting that wizards were as bad as everybody said they were, she instantly changed her mind.
My mother was right about you magic people, stormed Wish. You're cheats, and you're treacherous, and you have no morals, and you're completely out of control, and she's right, Tsar, squawked Caliburn. You get back from the universe what you give to the universe, and kidnapping this girl and stealing her sword means you can expect something truly dreadful from the universe in return. Do as you would be done by, or you will be well and truly done. Well, the universe ought to be very pleased that I'm not leaving them here to be attacked by witches. I can't understand why you're not all happy for me. Tsar frowned. It's terribly selfish of you. I am the boy of destiny. I am the chosen one. He turned to his animals and the giant. Night Eye, Forest Heart, Crusher, bring these stupid warriors and their pony to the fort after me. I shall fly with the warriors too, squeaked Squeeze-Juice. I shall stay with them and look out for jagulars. Don't feel you have to, Squeeze-Juice, said Tsar, rather offended. I wants to, sang Squeeze-Juice, ever enthusiastic. I likes her. She's a bit funny looking, and she's only got one eye, but she smells more like an apricot than a homuncular being, and I likes her hair. Squeeze-Juice flew into Wish's hair and fluffed up the back of it so it made a fuzzy little bird's nest for him to hide in. The spoon was jealous. This was his territory. Well, there's no accounting for tastes, huffed Tsar crossly. I'd have thought you'd want to hang out with the boy of destiny, but if you feel sorry for these poor weirdos, it's up to you, Squeeze-Juice. Come on, everyone, yelled Tsar. Race you back to the fort. King Cat leaped forward in a greeny-grey bound, and the animals followed in a wild, crazy pack, the sprites zooming ahead. Turning back time is impossible. Probably. But if Tsar could have seen Wish after he left her in the clearing, and if he could have seen the look on her face as she suddenly realised she couldn't make things right by putting back the sword, and that her mother would inevitably now discover her disobedience in that uncanny way that mothers do, and if he could have known that Wish's mother wasn't the kind of mother who had given her daughter the impression that she would forgive her daughter anything, if he could have seen Wish crying, with a spoon who couldn't talk, trying to comfort her with no words, and the assistant bodyguard, also sad, patting her on the back, and Squeeze-Juice pulling faces and turning cartwheels to try and cheer her up. If he could have seen all that, would Tsar have wanted to turn back time, even though that is impossible? Possibly. But looking into other people's lives when they are not right in front of you is also impossible. Probably. I say probably because turning back time and looking into other people's lives when they are not right in front of you are both things that require the kind of magic we call imagination. Tsar had not developed that kind of magic yet, any more than he could move objects with the sheer power of his mind or fly without the helpful addition of wings. So as soon as Wish was out of his sight, Tsar promptly forgot about her and carried on with the much more important task of congratulating himself on how clever he'd been as he rode on King Cat's back to Wizard Camp. Meanwhile, back in the clearing, Wish had stopped crying because Wish was a practical person and crying wasn't going to help. "What are we going to do now?" said Bodkin, with round goggling eyes bulging with dismay at the way the situation had developed. "Warriors don't quit, Bodkin. We're just going to have to follow that cheating burglar of a Tsar boy to his wizard camp and steal that enchanted sword back off him, and then we can sneak back into our own fort before morning," said Wish. "That sword is magic mixed with iron, and we mustn't let it fall into the hands of the wizards." "Oh, is that all we have to do?" said Bodkin hollowly. "And here was I thinking we had a problem." "On the plus side, we do get to ride these snowcats," said Wish. "That's a plus side?" said Bodkin, looking in horror at the gigantic wild beast standing uncomfortably close to them. "But they're banned animals. It's against the rules." Timidly, Wish put out her hand and touched the unbelievable softness of Forest Heart's head. She had been absolutely dying to ride on one of the snowcats from the moment she set eyes on them. Gingerly, Wish climbed onto his back. "Will you be following us, Crusher?" Wish called up to the giant. Crusher looked delighted to have his feelings consulted.
"I'm a bit slower than those snow cats," he said, giving a great smile like a cracked pumpkin. "But I'll be right behind you. I'll be fine. I'm a giant."
Of course. What was she thinking? A giant could take care of itself. He was probably a terrifying fighter, even if he was a vegetarian.
"Follow Tsar, please, Snowcat," said Wish.
Forest Heart leaped up and bounded forward with velvet suddenness. "I'm actually riding a snowcat. In real life," thought Wish with disbelieving excitement as the lynx weaved smoothly through the trees, the night wind blowing back Wish's hair. Wish forgot the peril of the moment and whooped in joy. By holly and mistletoe and witches' toenails and the stinky breath of the goggle-eyed goblin hopper, thought Bodkin, all alone in the clearing, that little princess was more like her mother than she looked. Stubborn, reckless, pig-headed, and the wizard boy was even worse. What was it with royalty? Maybe all the rich food they ate went to their heads. But what could poor Bodkin do? He couldn't stay here all alone in the possibly werewolf-infested wood, enjoying the cool night air and playing Spot the Roger breath. And besides, he ought to be protecting and controlling the uncontrollable little princess. That was his job. So, reluctantly, he climbed on top of the second band animal, who equally reluctantly allowed himself to be climbed on, and leaped forward after Wish. The giant crusher leaned down and gently picked up the sleeping pony in one giant hand. He smoothed the pony's mane with one giant finger, like a human might pet a mouse, before very gently putting the pony in one of his pockets, and very slowly lumbering after Bodkin and Wish and the snowcats. "Don't worry," shouted Wish across to Bodkin as Night Eye caught up with Forest Heart. "It's going to be fine."
"Don't worry," said Bodkin sarcastically. "It's going to be fine. So far tonight we have broken out of Warrior Fort without permission, taken an enchanted spoon as a pet, stolen your mother's extremely precious and, as it turns out, exceptionally dangerous sword, let that same sword fall into wizard hands, thus putting into peril the entire war against the magic, and now we are travelling into the heart of enemy territory on the back of a whole load of banned animals having been kidnapped by a lunatic wizard boy who may or may not be about to turn into a werewolf. Why would I worry?"
Bodkin's stomach gave a loud rumble.
"And we've missed supper. Deer burgers, my favourite."
Squeeze Juice zipped ahead like a little streak of white lightning, screeching,
"Eyes the lookout! Eyes the lookout! Ah! There's a jaguar! There's a jaguar! Oh, no, sorries. My mistake is a tree trunk. Sorries, everybody."
Silence as they went farther and farther into the dark wilderness of the wild woods, deeper and deeper into the unknown, where strange eyes seemed to glare from behind trees, and terrifying shrieks of the night time screamed all around them that could be jaguars, or could be werewolves, or could be worse than all of these. Luckily, Bodkin did not see two things that happened after they left the clearing, or he would have been even more worried than he was already. Firstly, the giant crusher was captured by Sycorax's iron warriors. Wish had been right to be concerned about him. Giants are deep thinkers, but unfortunately, the fact that they operate in a slower time zone puts them at a severe disadvantage when faced with much smaller enemies. Crusher just about had time to think,
"What on earth is going?"
before the warriors on their plunging horses exploded into the clearing and wound iron chains round and round his legs. The warriors warned him that if he made a sound, they would kill the pony. So the giant was silent as he was dragged away towards Iron Warrior Fort, making the treetops sway as he stumbled and blundered after the angry ant-like warriors. What were they so cross about? Giants didn't understand crossness. It seemed like such an obvious waste of time. And then there was silence. But the air in the clearing seemed to chill a few degrees colder than it had been before, and the snow moved and swelled like a white sea turning stormy. Was it that something was descending into the clearing? Had something been watching? Could it be that something was looking for the enchanted sword? Ah, yes, that would have made Bodkin worry. But if that something was a witch, however unlikely that may seem, Bodkin was going to need very advanced bodyguard skills indeed. Witches' feet make no footprint. Witches' bodies make no shadows. But they make the trees, the land, the moss a little colder as they pass. Curse Song of the Sprites.
We're not there, that's just air, that glimpse of wing you saw right there, that now. That wasn't us, so don't you cuss and don't you dare cross the sprites and curse their spite and make your hand a stony fist. You can't punch us, we don't exist. We're only mist, and that was just the wind that hissed. We don't care, and we weren't there, and for a dare we would never snap that chair and leave it looking like it was perfectly alright, and wait for someone big and fat and old to put their lardy fat behind on it. And smoosh, bang, ha ha ha, smash! The entire thing shatters into tiny smithereens, and then they land upon the stony floor and break their jaw and fuss and roar and cry until they cry no more. And that was not the eerie sound of fairy laughter when they cried. And if they said it was, they lied. That dying child, that wasn't us, so don't you cuss and don't you dare cross the sprites and curse their spite and make your hand a stony fist. You can't punch us, we don't exist. We're only mist, and that was just the wind that hissed. And that was just the wind that hissed.
7. Wizard Encampment. The animals flitted through the maze of the dark forest for what seemed like hours to Wish. They crossed the frozen river and the broken ghost wall that marked the end of warrior territory and the beginning of the land of the wizards, and eventually they reached a part of the wood that was so tangled and mangled with briars and fallen trees and vines that it was impossible to carry on. The moon came out from the clouds, and Ariel pointed at the barbed mountain of choking vegetation in front of them. In front of Wish and Bodkin's astonished eyes, the brambles and branches slid out and through and over each other, as if invisible fingers were unravelling a complicated knot from a fishing line. With a creak like the bending of ancient knees, the trees swayed and bent to left and right. The vegetation flattened, so that a clearing lay in front of them. The hairs stood up on the back of Wish and Bodkin's necks, as the quills might rise on a thorny hedgehog when they saw what lay inside the clearing. A truly gigantic circle of ancient trees, most of them giants, yew, birch, rowan, alder, willow, ash, hawthorn, elder, apple, poplar, every species you could imagine, the most important being the oak, of course. No sign of any human habitation, but a sound of music and a smell of chimney smoke. Now that they were so far away from home and so deep in enemy territory, Wish was beginning to feel very, very frightened. What if Tsar held them to ransom? Tsar had said he would let them go the next morning, but Tsar didn't seem very trustworthy. "Where's your fort?" asked Wish shakily. "Underground," said Tsar. Imagine a camp that has been sunk underground. Each one of those gigantic trees was hollow and drew light down into the rooms hidden underneath. Tsar led them to the tree tower which housed his room, a great ancient yew so wound round on itself that it looked as if in the tree's youth a giant had taken it gently by the topmost branches and twisted the trunk round in his hands as if the yew were a piece of clay. They climbed a series of ladders and platforms and in through the window of Tsar's room. Wish's heart sank even further. There was no way out now. They were stuck here, surrounded by enemies. What if Tsar told the other wizards about her? What if there were wizards worse than Tsar who really could magic you into a slow death? She felt a little sick. There was no ceiling in Tsar's room, so above them was the night sky and the stars. The floor had such huge cracks in it that you could see right down into the main hall 40 feet below. "Don't worry," said Caliburn reassuringly to the astonished Bodkin and Wish, watching Tsar strolling across a floor that seemed to be made partly of air.
The floor is held together by magic.
Tsar opened his rucksack and took out the spelling book to find the spell about turning people into worms. It was right beside the page that told you how to turn people into cats, easy, and cats back into people, trickier. First, Tsar thought he would punish Luther by turning him into a worm using the witch magic. Then, in a dramatic climax, he would draw the sword and show everyone how he could use magic that works on iron. And then, of course, they would all start clapping and cheering him, chanting his name. His own father would bow down before him, saying,
Tsar, I am so sorry I ever doubted you. I always knew you were something special. I know we have had our misunderstandings in the past, but you are the hero we have all been waiting for.
It was all going to be so satisfactory. Tsar memorized the spell and slammed the book shut.
Come on, sprites, said Tsar briskly. The competition is going to start in a couple of minutes, and we need to get down there so I can humiliate Luther. Everyone follow me, except you, Forest Heart, Night Eye, King Cat, the Bear, and Squeeze Juice.
Oh, why does Eyes have to stay behind? Said Squeeze Juice.
Well, you seem to like the warriors so much, said Tsar pointedly,
for he had been feeling a little jealous.
So you can stay here and guard them.
Don't you worry, boss. I shall protect them.
I didn't say protect them, Squeeze Juice. I said guard them. They're enemy prisoners.
But I did once to comes with you and sees you turn into a werewolf,
said Squeeze Juice, very disappointed.
I'm sure I can see a few more hairs on his arms already,
hissed Tiffin-Storm, eyes bright with malicious pleasure.
Oh, shut up, both of you, snapped Tsar. I'm not going to turn into a werewolf. This is witch blood, and I'm going to use it to perform magic.
But you don't know if it will work yet, Caliburn pointed out. And shouldn't you find out what that stain is before you go in front of a whole load of other people and possibly turn into a werewolf in front of their eyes?
Tsar looked at him as if he were completely crazy.
But that would mean waiting, Tsar pointed out, and the spelling competition is happening right now. Anyway, even if the witch blood doesn't work, I know the sword works.
You're not allowed to take swords into spelling competitions, Tsar, let alone iron ones, said Caliburn.
And it's our sword, protested Wish.
I wish you'd stop saying that. This is a magic sword, said Tsar, so it belongs to me, and all your gloomy, what you give to the universe will give back to you stuff, Caliburn. Well, all I can say is, by bringing this sword to me, the universe clearly thinks I'm pretty special.
And the universe is right,
squealed Squeeze Juice. There was no talking to Tsar when he was in this kind of mood. The universe is really tipping it down now, said Caliburn gloomily, as big splatters of rain came down on their shoulders. Downstairs in the main hall, the jubilant sound of dancing giants and happy voices could be heard. Upstairs in the little room, tangled with jungle vines swaying in the wind, rocking like a boat on the sea, a heavy, drenching rain was now falling in Tsar's room.
Why on earth would you design a room with no ceiling? Wondered Bodkin. It's not very practical.
Tiffin-Storm, said Tsar, do as a weather spell before we all drown, and you'll have to stay here to keep the spell up so the prisoners don't get wet.
Tiffin-Storm huffed crossly.
Why is it always me who has to do everything? I wanted to see the spelling competition.
Before sulkily looking in her wand bag and getting out a number 4. She picked out a spell and batted it up in the air with the wand, and a nice little invisible umbrella of wind sprang out at the end of the spell, hovering some 3 or 4 feet above them, so that the rain poured over the edges in a waterfall.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible, marvelled Wish. Don't be impressed, warned Bodkin. Remember, magic may look attractive on the outside, but it is danger, it is chaos.
You have to admit it's extremely useful if you don't want to get wet, though, said Tsar.
A ceiling works quite well too, said Bodkin.
Tsar slammed the door and locked it.
He's taken the sword with him, said Wish, very disappointed. We'll just have to wait till he comes back, and then we can steal the sword off him when he's asleep. OK. So say we do successfully manage to steal the sword off Tsar, said Bodkin. How do we get back to our fort? We can't walk back, it's miles away. Oh dear, Tsar was right, we're prisoners, said Wish, peering out of the window into the blackness of the night.
It was a long way down to the bottom of the tower, and there was absolutely no sign of the giant or the pony.
And I'm worried that poor Crusher might have been captured by my mother's warriors. Poor Crusher, he's a giant, Wish, said Bodkin, very shocked. Whose side are you on?
With a heavy sigh, Wish turned away from the window and picked up the spelling book that Tsar had carelessly left on the table.
Bodkin, you have to see this book. This is unbelievable, said Wish,
forgetting her fear and her anxiety, and nearly dropping the book in her excitement.
We really shouldn't have anything to do with these things, Wish, said Bodkin uneasily. They're magic. We shouldn't be looking. We shouldn't be listening. We shouldn't be holding them.
But this book says it has 6 million pages in it.
That's impossible,
said Bodkin, peering over her shoulder despite himself, for Bodkin loved books, and a book with 6 million pages in it was something he had to see.
Look, said Wish. It says it's a complete guide to absolutely everything you need to know about your magic world. Maps, recipes, magic species, wizards, witches, dwarves, goblins, lynxes, sprites. And then there's a breakdown of all the different types, and then there's a section on lost words. That sounds interesting. Languages, dwarvish, elvish, giantish, doorish. What's doorish? I didn't know Door spoke.
The book was very confusing to read because lots of the pages were falling out, and when they floated back in again they were in a different order, and whoever had written it was very disorganised and kept on going off on tangents that might lead somewhere or might be dead ends.
And some of the spelling in this book is nearly as bad as mine, said Wish triumphantly. That's not a good thing, Wish, Bodkin pointed out. You know your mother would say there's only one way to spell things, and that is the right way. Anything else is chaos, disorder, anarchy.
But Wish wasn't listening.
Oh my goodness, look! I'm in this book,
said Wish in astonishment, turning to a picture in the Giants section.
And Crusher! How is that possible?
Bodkin squinted over her shoulder.
Well, that's just a picture of a girl, isn't it? It doesn't have to be you. The girl has a spoon on her head, Wish pointed out.
So she does, sighed Bodkin. I suppose it could be you because this book is magic. Bodkin shivered because it was really quite an eerie thought that a book could be magic enough to write you into it without you knowing.
Which is why we really, really should not be reading it. I'm only looking at it to see if it can help us escape.
Squeeze Juice and Tiffenstorm and the Snowcats were not doing a very good job of guarding Tsar's prisoners. It had been a long, tiring day, and they had all fallen asleep, so maybe they could escape, thought Bodkin, his heart lifting.
Now, how did Tsar make it work? Frowned Wish. He tapped on each letter on the contents page, and the pages magically turned to the right place. Bother, my spelling isn't that good. Bodkin, could you help?
Bodkin leaned over Wish's shoulder and tapped, "How do you escape from a magic tree in a wizard's fort and make your way through the bad woods if you have no rope, no transport, and no compass or means of knowing where you are?" into the spelling book. However, all the answers seemed to involve some sort of specialist equipment, like flying carpets or shoes with wings, and a lot of them pointed out all of the dangers of the bad woods in horribly realistic and ghoulish detail, such as giant cats and werewolves and mushrooms with teeth, and Bodkin didn't particularly want to be reminded of these. The two of them jumped nervously at an unbelievably loud noise coming from below Tsar's locked room, a noise like about 20 thunderclaps going off at the same time, which was the sound of some of the wizards in the main hall below fighting each other.
"Good gracious, what was that?" exclaimed Bodkin.
Wish peered down between the cracks in Tsar's walls, and she could see right down into the main hall. The spelling competition was beginning. 8. The spelling competition. This was a feast of fire, so bonfires leaped high in all corners of the main hall, and a great leaping circle of fire marked out the spelling ring, right in the buzzing centre of the rowdy banquet. The hall was jam-packed with wizards of all ages and sizes, happy, sleepy giants dancing or snoozing ponderously on the edges of the room, and howling wolves, lumbering bears, snowcats watching carefully in the shadows from the branches above, their tails swinging. Fiddles and horns danced through the air, playing themselves quite independently with no visible musician in sight. In one corner of the room, Incanzo the Enchanter was deep in political conversation with the other adult wizards.
Swiveli, a wizard from a rival tribe, was arguing that the wizards needed to fight back against the warriors just as their ancestors had in the past.
"The time has come for battle," said Swiveli, "and for a new leader, me, to be king, rather than you in Cantho."
The young wizard's spelling competition was taking place in another corner, and Luther had been beating everybody until Tsar swaggered in, followed by the bear and the wolves and the sprites zooming overhead, stealing hats and pinching noses and generally showing off. And within 2 seconds, Ariel had zoomed underneath all the banqueting tables, tying people's shoelaces together so that when they stood up and tried to move off, they fell face forward onto the table, hopefully into something squishy and messy like stew. Time Lost turned patches of the floor into ice, and all of the other sprites were making nuisances of themselves in an equally naughty manner.
"What are you doing here, Tsar?" sneered Luther. "Your magic hasn't come in yet."
"I'm here to challenge you," said Tsar grandly.
"With what?" grinned Luther. "Don't tell me you caught your witch, did you, baby brother?" he said lightly.
He turned back to his laughing friends and jerked a thumb at Tsar.
"This loser thought he was going to catch himself a witch and steal some of its magic. Ha 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 ha," laughed the young wizards.
Tsar shrugged carelessly.
"Maybe I did catch that witch, Luther," he said. "Why don't you try some of your spelling on me and we'll see what happens?"
"Or are you afraid?" "Watch out, Luther," warned Darkish. "He did catch something. I don't know what it was."
"Of course you didn't catch a witch," jeered Luther.
"And you can't do magic, little baby boy. I warned you, if you dared to enter this competition, I would annihilate you. And I will."
Tsar walked into the chalk circle, and as he stepped in, there was a short, sharp humming noise, and a force field of magic leaped over both himself and Luther in a thin, see-through dome, hissing with power. Everyone was quiet, with that quiet where you know something is going to happen. Time Lost drew one of his wands, as did Bumbleboozle, but they couldn't help Tsar now. He had stepped inside the circle. Tsar was on his own. Tsar held out his hands towards Luther.
"Oh, you're going to do magic without a staff, are you, Tsar?"
scoffed Luther, and his friends all laughed loudly at this. Magic without a staff was advanced wizard work, and only great enchanters like Tsar's father could do that.
"Be afraid, Luther, be very afraid," warned Tsar, "for I have not only the magic of the witch, my magic has the power to work on iron."
"Ha ha 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 ha!" jeered all the young wizards.
"Oh, really?"
smiled Luther. He was going to enjoy this so much.
"That's right," said Tsar. "I am the boy that destiny has chosen."
Confidently, Tsar held his hand with the witch stain on it out in front of him. "Feel the power," thought Tsar. "Feel the power. Imagine in your head. Feel the power in your fingers." That was what the teachers always said. But Tsar got redder and redder in the face, and more angry, and it was just like every other time he had tried to do magic and failed. Nothing happened. Luther had been creeping warily round the edge of the circle in case that lunatic brother of his really had caught himself some extinct life form. Impossible though that was, you never knew with Tsar. He had a way of making impossible things happen. But now, Luther's eyes lit up.
"Oh, dear,"
crooned Luther, holding his staff lovingly in his hands.
"Oh, dear. So, boy of destiny, chosen one, where is your scary witch magic now, then?"
"The boy of destiny,"
laughed the young wizards outside the circle.
"I don't understand," said Tsar, bewildered and furious. "I am the boy of destiny. I can do it. I know I can do magic."
Botheration, thought Tsar. He had been so sure, what with the witch-killing motto and the sword and everything, that this must all be a sign from fate. But maybe he had been wrong. And if this wasn't witch blood, then what was it? Please, please, let me not turn into a werewolf in front of everybody, thought Tsar. That would be embarrassing. Not for the first time, Tsar wished he had taken Caliburn's advice. He could feel his skin prickling all over, as if hairs were about to sprout out of it any moment.
"You can't do magic," said Luther, "but I can. Let me show you how I do it. I wonder what I shall do first. Maybe I'll do this."
He pointed his staff at Tsar. There was a flash of sheet lightning, and the white-hot heat of magic light shot out of it, hitting Tsar full in the chest, so hard that he was thrown up into the edge of the invisible circle of the magic force field. "Oh, bother," thought Tsar, dully picking himself up. "This isn't going to plan."
"I'm going to turn you green,"
grinned Luther, shooting blasts of magic at Tsar, who turned brilliantly green as he was shot to the other side of the ring, trying not to scream as the blasts hit him like punches in the stomach.
"and red, and yellow, and pink."
As Tsar was blasted across the spelling ring, turning violently different colours, he felt more and more nauseous, and he struggled not to be sick in front of everyone.
"Ha, ha, 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 ha!" roared the cronies of Luther and the wizard children who Tsar had played tricks on and bossed about in the past.
"You need to be taught a lesson," smiled Luther, "and I am going to teach you a lesson you will never, ever forget."
He advanced closer to Tsar, who was now doubled up in pain, groaning.
"You're small now," said Luther, "but I shall make you smaller."
He pointed his staff at Tsar and muttered a spell under his breath.
"Shrink was the spell.
"Shrink!" "Oh dear, not a shrinking spell," thought Tsar. "That's really painful, and I'm already kind of on the small side. I'd better bring out the sword." But he didn't have time before the magic screamed out of the end of Luther's staff and hit the doubled-up Tsar and lit him up at the edges as if he were a Tsar made out of stars. Tsar stifled a howl of pain as those stars set into a vice-like grip, and a pinch that began in his forehead spread across his entire body as the magic tightened and pinched and compressed and crushed him as though he were wearing a suit of armour that was slowly squeezing shut like the closing of a fist.
"Say I've won!"
shouted Luther, backing off to give Tsar a moment to give up the fight.
"Surrender!"
Tsar's mouth was squidged out of shape by the shrinking process, but he managed to shout, "No, I won't!" It came out weirdly squeakily through the shrinking, squirming O of his lips.
"All right then," said Luther. "You'll have to go smaller still."
This time, Tsar did let out a yell as the spell hit him in a trembling shriek of pinches and pressure, shrinking his bones down a size smaller than they were. Bother! This wasn't giving him time to draw the beastly sword.
"Do you give up?" said Luther.
"Of course not," yelled Tsar. "Now you have really annoyed me, Luther."
Luckily, this made Luther stop doing magic for a second because he was laughing so hard he nearly dropped his staff.
"Oh, I've really annoyed you, have I? I'm so scared. I'm so scared."
So while Luther was busy laughing, Tsar was able to draw the sword. In the nick of time, for if his hands had gone any smaller, he wouldn't have been able to hold it. But he could just about get his palm around the handle and get enough grip to pull it out of his belt. And it was a moment of triumph. Tsar drew the enchanted sword, with that satisfying swishing sound that swords make, and as they heard it, the gaze of the onlookers turned from scorn into surprise and horror as they realised what that sword was made of. Iron. Luther took a step backwards.
"You can't bring an iron sword in here," spluttered Luther. "Where did you get that from, you lunatic?"
"I broke into the warrior fort," lied Tsar boastfully, "and stole it from right under the warriors' snooty-posh little noses. And I can bring it in because it's a magic witch-killing sword. And as you will see, my magic, which has come in, can control it and enchant it."
Luther shot an anxious bolt of magic at the approaching Tsar, and with one satisfying slice of the sword, Tsar cut it in half before it reached him.
"Was that another shrinking spell, Luther?" jeered Tsar. "Better try another one, for I am coming closer."
Then the fight began in earnest, with Luther shooting hot, quick magic bolts from his staff, and Tsar intercepting them and breaking them in half so they fell uselessly to the ground as fast as Luther could direct them towards Tsar. The sword felt as if it was coming alive like a freshly caught salmon in Tsar's hand, and it was anticipating Luther's next move before he made it. Tsar wasn't as light as Wish, so it wasn't quite as clear that it was the sword doing the fighting rather than Tsar himself. He just looked like he had suddenly and miraculously turned into the best sword fighter in the world. The crowd was now pointing in an admiring rather than mocking way as Tsar ran round the spelling ring, carving up Luther's spell bolts, shouting, "What have you to say about my magic now, Luther?" and generally showing off. "It's working," thought Tsar joyfully, and it was every bit as exciting as he had dreamed it would be. He could hear Heliotrope saying to Leaf Song, "Wow, fighting with a sword's kind of cooler than with a staff, isn't it?" And Leaf Song replying, "Do you think Tsar really is the boy of destiny?" "I'm a star," thought Tsar exultantly. "I knew I was a star all along, and now everybody else will know it too." And then everything went wrong. Suddenly, mysteriously, the enchanted sword began to drag Tsar rather too violently to the left and to the right. "What's going on?" thought Tsar. One moment it was as if he and the sword were one and the same, and he was in triumphant control of it. The next, it felt worryingly as if the sword were trying to escape from him. Tsar was having to hang on to the sword with both hands, until with a great plunging leap that pulled him 3 feet up in the air, the sword dragged itself out of his grasp and rocketed up through the dome circle of the magic surrounding them, which caused the entire circle to explode. The force of the explosion sent magic ricocheting around the great hall in huge violent blasts, ripping holes in the ceiling, and fireballs the size of pumpkins flew across the room. The enchanted sword, after exploding out of the magic circle, sailed up into the rafters of the ceiling of the main hall and disappeared in the direction of Tsar's room. When the smoke cleared, Tsar and Luther had been thrown onto their backs and were lying on the floor, choking and coughing. A great crack had opened up beneath Tsar's feet and split right across the floor of the room. "What is going on here?" The King Enchanter's voice was cold as ice. 9. In Kanzo, the King Enchanter. The King Enchanter was a tall man, and magic had made him taller still. It was curiously difficult to look at him, for he always seemed to be very slightly changing shape, blurring in and out at the edges. But underneath the constantly changing outline of his face, where magic came and went like waves on a coastline, he was stern and unbending as a cliff. He was such a very powerful wizard that there was something very scary about him, even when he was just standing there quietly. He had one black fingernail on his right hand, and there was a story of how the fingernail had turned that colour, but no one dared ask the enchanter what the story was. 2 very large, very old snow cats settled themselves on either side of the enchanter, as if they were statues framing a door. Tsar and Luther staggered to their feet like a couple of carbon scarecrows.
"Tsar," snapped the enchanter, "what has happened here? And what are you doing competing in the spelling competition?"
The cold anger dropped from the enchanter's voice for a second as he asked, "Has your magic come in at last?" The enchanter's voice was eager, too eager, for it told his son how much the enchanter wanted that magic to come in.
"It has," said Tsar.
"It has not," said Luther.
"Well, Tsar,"
said the enchanter, sternly, and this time you could hear his disappointment,
"has it come in or has it not?"
"Maybe not," admitted Tsar sulkily.
"Then why are you competing in this spell?"
began the enchanter, but Luther was so cross he rudely interrupted his father.
"He cheated! He's completely out of control!" roared Luther. "He went into the Badwoods this evening with some mad plan that he was going to catch a witch and use its magic for himself, and then he tried to attack me with his eye—"
Luther was going to tell the enchanter about the sword,
But unfortunately, the enchanter punished him for his rudeness by sewing Luther's lips tight with magic before he got to the end of this sentence. One flick of the enchanter's little finger, and Luther's mouth shot together like he had lockjaw. Ranter, Tsar's tutor of wizardry and advanced spell work, now rushed forward. Ranter was a huge pomposity of a man, with a nose like a dignified lobster and various quivering, outraged chins. His air of dignity and calm was disrupted by the fact he was being closely followed not only by some very grand and ancient sprites, but also 6 small piglets, oinking lovingly up at him.
"I have tried to speak to you about this on many, many occasions, Enchanter," cried Ranter, "and you have chosen not to listen. This is only the latest in a long line of disobediences. In the past week, your son has ridden his snowcat up the fort flagpole, removed the flag of the wizard tribe, and replaced it with a pair of your Excellency's underpants. He has burned down the west part of the camp."
"That was an accident," objected Tsar, interrupting. "I was just teasing the chimney sprites and they couldn't take a joke. Besides," he added hurriedly, "it wasn't me and I wasn't there." And with the last complaint, Ranter's voice dropped to a thrilling, furious quiver that made his chins shiver from side to side, banging against one another.
"And worst of all, he has poured Love Never Lies potion into the pigs' feeding trough, and so the pigs are behaving in a most outrageous fashion."
Despite his intense annoyance with his younger son, the enchanter's lips twitched with amusement. He looked down at the pigs, gazing up at Ranter adoringly.
"Ah, yes. I did wonder why you had taken to having pigs as followers, Ranter. Not very dignified for a senior wizard of your standing, I thought."
"The pigs," spat Ranter, "are not my idea. Your son has inflicted them on me, and you should not find this amusing, Enchanter. Your son's disobedience and lack of magic brings dishonour to our whole tribe."
"What do you have to say for yourself, Tsar?"
said the enchanter.
"You have no evidence,"
shouted Tsar, furiously punching the air. "I am Tsar the Magnificent, and I demand a fair trial."
"Of course,"
said Incanzo the Magnificent.
"Could you show me what you have there, Tsar?"
He pointed to a package that was poking out of one of the pockets hanging round Tsar's waist. Very reluctantly, Tsar took the package out of his pocket, and Incanzo insisted he unwrapped it. The package turned out to be a burned flag of the wizard tribe, tied around a half-full bottle of Love Never Lies potion. Incanzo shook out the flag.
"Yes, I would call this evidence, wouldn't you? And I pronounce you guilty."
"I have never seen that flag before in my life," proclaimed Tsar.
Unfortunately, Tsar was still holding on to the bottle of Love Never Lies potion, and Love Never Lies potion has 2 properties. One is that if you eat it or smell it, you fall in love with the next person or animal you see. The other is that it turns from red to blue when the person who is holding it tells a lie. Incanzo watched the Love Never Lies potion as slowly the liquid turned from maroon to a sort of smoky indigo.
"Someone must have put that flag and that Love Never Lies potion into my pocket because they certainly don't belong to me,"
said Tsar, carrying on lying in a hopeful sort of way. The indigo of the Love Never Lies potion darkened to black at the magnitude of this untruth. The bottle filled with smoke and shook in Tsar's hand. The cork shot off, and Tsar hurriedly recorked it, but not before a fine mist of Love Never Lies potion had drenched the little piglets sitting in a quiet but loving circle at Ranter's feet, and this fresh sprinkling made them jump to their feet again, oinking madly and making ruder and ever ruder noises as they tried to get Ranter's attention.
"Oh!" roared Ranter, batting away at the piglets. "Get off me! Shoo, you beastly creatures! Shoo!"
Only Tsar dared laugh at this entertaining sight, because the enchanter had stopped being amused. He was staring down at his younger son with thunderous eyebrows descending down over his fierce hawk eyes.
"You are not only guilty of everything Ranter and Luther have accused you of, Tsar, you are also a liar and a thief," said the enchanter grimly.
Curse his beastly father. Why did he always have to make Tsar feel so small?
"And now you must give up these silly little tricks of yours and grow up," said the enchanter, "while all these other things are just stupid and babyish. Trying to obtain a source of bad magic is a serious crime that warriors have been expelled for in the past."
"And he should be expelled," said Ranter, breaking in with excitement. "The last son of Incanzo the Magnificent, king of wizards, not to have magic, it's shaming, it's terrible. What if the magic never comes in? We would be the laughingstock of the woods."
Tsar's stomach did an uncomfortable flip. "You are only saved from expulsion by the sheer stupidity of your idea, Tsar," said the enchanter with withering coldness. "Even a 13-year-old should know that witches are extinct. And if there really was such a thing as a witch out there, only a madman would try to get within 100 yards of it." Incanzo pointed his finger at Tsar. Incanzo did not need a staff to concentrate his magic. It blasted out with such pure intensity it was not even visible. Tsar's blackened clothes closed around him so tightly that he could barely breathe. There was a writhing snake pattern on the broken dust of the mud floor where Tsar was standing. The patterned snakes on the floor began to move around each other, and then they grew solid and slid up and off the floor and twined their way around Tsar's legs, and his now living clothes carried him up in the air like he was swinging from the branches of a tree, and the hissing snakes turned into liquid mercury that curled around him and solidified and turned into chains, so that he was hanging suspended in the air, twisted round with bonds.
"Let me down!"
cried Tsar, furious with temper. "You have gone into the bad woods against my express instruction," said the enchanter. "You sought to take magic from a dark source and bring it into this fort, to cheat your way into winning a spelling competition. I will keep you up there until I decide your punishment."
"I don't see why I should be punished at all,"
fumed Tsar, struggling in the chains, his legs kicking wildly in the air.
"It's not fair. I don't see why you always pick on me."
"I always pick on you because it is always you who has done everything," replied the enchanter in exasperation. Caliburn spread his wings and whispered in the enchanter's ear.
"I would suggest patience," said the raven. "It's very important that you are patient with children and try and see things from their point of view."
"I have been very patient with the boy," said the enchanter from between gritted teeth, "but I am running out of patience. The boy must learn to obey me, and if he does not, he must be punished."
"The more strongly you punish him, the more he will rebel,"
warned Caliburn. Demendor, the ambassador to the court from Drood High Command, stroked his beard and put his finger high in the air.
"A boy without magic is a sign the gods are most displeased."
"That's true," said Swivelli, a rival wizard who was always trying to overthrow Incanzo. This is another story I'll tell you about later. "And maybe your failure to punish and control your son effectively is a sign you are not fit to be the ruler of this tribe." Ah, being a father and a king is harder than it looks. And everyone thinks they could do a better job than whoever happens to be the parent or the monarch at the time. "Be quiet, the lot of you!" cried Incanzo, the king enchanter. "When I need your advice, I will ask for it," said the enchanter. "Tsar is merely being childishly disobedient and showing off in front of his friends because his magic hasn't come in yet." Tsar lost his temper.
"Well, at least I'm trying to do something," shouted Tsar. "At least I'm trying to act, whereas you, father, you do nothing at all."
The hall full of wizards drew in their breaths simultaneously. The outline of the enchanter hummed with fury. Great shooting sparks came off him, and above, the clouds drifting across the high ceiling of the room grew darker and darker, and great rumbling bursts of thunder echoed throughout. Caliburn put his wings over his eyes. Was Tsar actually trying to get himself expelled?
"Why aren't we going out there to fight the warrior army?" shouted Tsar.
"That was just the point that I was making," purred Swivelli, eyes alight with pleasure. "Even Incanzo's own son thinks his father is not doing a good job as king." Swivelli broke off, because the enchanter's finger had given a little flick, and the torque around Swivelli's neck tightened inexplicably, and it was quite a while before Swivelli could breathe again. "Confronting the warriors would only be a good thing if it was a fight that we could win," said the enchanter, trying to keep his temper. Why do you think we cannot win it? Shouted Tsar. Maybe the warriors are wiping us out anyway while we hide here in our slowly shrinking forest, twiddling our thumbs and thumbing our fiddles and doing our poxy little magic spells and love potions while they burn up our forest and kill our giants and destroy our entire way of life.
In Kanzo, the king enchanter's eyes blazed.
We are hiding from the warriors like cowards, Tsar shouted back. Why are you teaching us to be such cowards, father? Maybe you are a coward. Silence! Stormed the enchanter. Or I will make you silent. I will sew your lips tight with magic. Do it then, said Tsar. I do not care. Enough! Shouted the enchanter. I have decided your punishment. You and your sprites and your animals shall be locked in your room for the next 3 days. It's not enough, muttered Ranter furiously. Tsar looked stricken. No, father! Then you should not be disobedient. Should you? Said his father, the enchanter, in his sternest voice. Now, be silent. I was the one who was disobedient. Don't punish them. Punish me, said Tsar furiously. 3 days, said the enchanter, even more coldly and white with temper. Every time you speak, I will add on 1 more day. Tsar opened his mouth to speak and shut it again. 4 days, said the enchanter. You shall not leave your room for 4 days, and if you do not listen to me and disobey me, father, I will take your animals and sprites away from you forever. Tsar did care about that. Oh my goodness, he cared about that. He was silent. I am the king here, said the enchanter. All of you in this room need to remember that, and Tsar needs a reminder of who we are. His father continued. You have a very fine opinion of yourself, Tsar, but the truth is you are conceited. You are willfully disobedient. You are astonishingly selfish, and the fact that you tried to obtain bad magic from a witch shows you do not understand the very basics of what it means to be a wizard. For wizards should seek good magic, Tsar. You have one last chance to be good, warned the enchanter. Be good, for any more disobedience, and I will be forced to expel you and remove all your animals and sprites. You don't care about me, cried Tsar at the top of his voice. All you want is a son who is magic. Silence! Roared the enchanter. He moved his arms once more, and all around the hall, where columns and pillars and staircases had been shattered into thousands of tiny pieces by the blast of the spelling ring exploding, the tiny dusty fragments lifted up from the floor and danced in the air like clouds of humming bees. The enchanter moved his arms as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra, and the dust responded to his instructions. It is easy to destroy, said the enchanter, but I am not like a warrior impressed by destruction. It is far harder to create, and creation is what we wizards are all about. Play, fiddles, play. The fiddles shot up into the air and began to play themselves, and the millions of tiny fragments billowing through the gigantic hall in enormous drifts, like smoke from a forest fire, danced in time to the music, with such speeding energy that you could feel the heat coming off them and warming up the faces of the wondering wizards looking up in awe. It was a very effective demonstration of the power of the enchanter, for invention was far more difficult magic than demolition, and only he could perform magic as tremendous as this. He was doing it to make a point to his son, and to remind Swivelli and the other wizards gathered there of what wizards should stand for. And it worked. Even Swivelli reluctantly gasped in awe, while cursing under his breath, mind you. Create, Tsar, create, and then you will impress me, finished the enchanter, his arms whirling wildly and gloriously to the tune of the music he had inspired. And in the meantime, you will stay in your room until I tell you to come out. With a final eardrum-bursting clap of thunderous magic that lit up the hall like sheet lightning, the millions of tiny pieces of dust slammed together and formed whole columns once more. The crack in the floor closed, and Tsar's clothes and the flying snake chains carried Tsar up to his room, where the door flew open and the snake chains swung him back and forth and then suddenly released him, depositing him on the floor. The enchanter made a sign to Tsar's animals and sprites,
and the animals leapt out of the hall and up the stairs, with the sprites following, and Caliburn too, with slow, reluctant wing beats. The door of Tsar's room slammed shut behind them.
"It won't be enough," sniffed Luther, whose lips had at last come unstuck. "Ranta was right. You should have expelled him."
The enchanter roared at Luther, unusually, for Luther was normally his favourite son. And when I say roared, I mean he opened up his mouth and a blast of furious magic came out of it with such force that it actually blew Luther off his feet. And then Incanzo stalked off and threw himself into his throne and put his head into his hands, thinking, "What is wrong with Tsar? Why has his magic not come in yet? I have given him the best giant in my land, the finest tree, the most brilliant adviser in Caliburn. But why can't I control him?" 10. 15 minutes earlier, in Tsar's room. Now, the room Tsar returned to was in a very different state than when he had left it only 15 minutes earlier. Bad things had been happening in Tsar's room. These bad things had been happening to Wish and to Bodkin, the sprites and the animals who had all been locked in that room by Tsar, if you remember. Very, very bad things. In order to explain them, I will have to go back in time, exactly 15 minutes. Of course, in real life, turning back time is impossible. I think I've already mentioned that. But contrariwise, I can do it, for I am the god of this story, and thus have rather more magic than perhaps is quite good for me. Imagine Tsar's room 15 minutes earlier. The spelling competition is going on down below, and Wish and Bodkin are watching it through the floor. You are in that very 15 minutes, and even now, very now, through the drenching rain and wildness, something is creeping up the fort walls with invisible, undetectable footsteps. Something old and dark and very, very evil. It could be a Rogerbreath, looking to get its blood back. It could be a werewolf, wanting Tsar to join its pack. Or it could be something else. Normally, Wizard Fort would be entirely protected by an invisible barrier of magic that hung around the forest grove. But when Tsar had taken the sword into the fort, the iron had tunnelled a hole in the magic. The path of the iron sword led up the tree trunk and into Tsar's room. And such is the power of iron that anyone or anything taking the path the iron had taken would be undetected by the magic. Too bad, because the 2 feathers in the jacket Tsar had left in his room were very gently, very minutely beginning to glow at the edges with a sickly greenish light. The snowcats and Squeeze-Juice and Tiffinstorm and the bear had fallen into the deep sleep of those who have spent a nice old-fashioned day out in the fresh air building witch traps and running through badwoods. But something in the change in atmosphere made Bodkin and Wish look up from where they were kneeling on the invisible floor of Tsar's room and stare around themselves with shivers of sick alarm. The enchanted spoon was shaking with anxiety on Wish's head. Below them they could hear the sound of the spelling competition. But outside in the forest, the rain, the thunder and the lightning and the wind that had been sending Tsar's bedroom plunging this way and that as if a lunatic were rocking a baby's cradle, stopped with surprising suddenness. The thunder ceased to be replaced by an eerie quietness, a silence as if the forest world surrounding them were leaning in to gaze at something unusual and frightening enclosed within its shut green fist. The only sound was the water dripping from the edges of the invisible spell above them. Drip, drip, drip. Wish could see right through the spell up into the starry, starry sky above, the branches of the trees strangely still, as if painted against the dark sky. There was a coldness in the air that Wish had felt when they were being chased in the wood earlier that evening, a coldness that seeped into her. And to her horror, Wish could see the black feathers hanging inside Tsar's empty jacket were lighting up, with a queasy, pallid, yellow-green glow that pulsed steadily in and out, as if in time with someone breathing. Wish's breath was so thick in her throat She thought she might choke. It was as if ants were crawling through her hair, sending each individual shaft shooting upwards in a thrill of horror. Above them both, the spell was like a piece of glass, with the liquid of the rain already streaked across it. But was that something else? Some shadow moving like a dream beyond the glass, a nauseating, undulating, greasy movement that blotted out the stars as it moved. Or was it just the bilious shadow of Wish's own imagination, the tired creation of her bloodshot eyes after a long and weary and frightening day? Wish was sure there was a dark shape moving glutinously behind the glass. At least she thought she was sure. What was it that they said about witches? That they were as invisible as ghosts, but they had to turn visible when they attacked, or else their hands passed through you as harmlessly as air? And then, with absolute terror, she knew it was no mirage. Her painfully stretched ears definitely heard whispering in the invisibility above. Drip, 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 drip. Whisper, whisper, whisper. Stiere, stiere. Witches speak the same language as we do, but each individual word is back to front. Stiere means it's here. Wake up, croaked Wish to the snowcats and Squeeze Juice and Tiffenstorm in a strangled whisper. Wake up now, we have to get out of here. The wind began to blow again, a couple of breaths that brought the hot, rank smell of witch down into the room, a pungent whiff of poisoned rat and adder's tongue, as chock full of death as a dose from an apothecary. The snowcats, lying half smothered in leaves, woke to that smell. As one, they opened up their sleepy eyes, and all of them knew instantly they needed to be silent, like deers that scent a fox. Tiffenstorm opened her eyes, 1, 2, saw the glowing, pulsing feathers, and turned as still as if stuffed. Bodkin tried the door, but Tsar had locked it, of course. We're locked in, said Bodkin in appalled horror. We can't get out of here, before fainting dead away with his fingers on the handle of the door. Bodkin, shrieked Wish, wake up now! Bodkin woke up with a start, mumbling, Where? What? How? Tsar's room, panted the princess. Wizard Fort! We're being attacked by something really spooky! What is it? Whispered Tiffenstorm, staring upward and getting a good grip of her thorn of a wand. The sword! Oh, by the gods of the still and standing waters, we need the enchanted sword! Yelled Wish. Now you see, there are no accidents. There was a reason that the enchanted sword left Tsar's hand at that precise, very inconvenient moment for Tsar down below in the spelling competition. Let's face it, Wish needed the sword at that moment for rather more serious reasons than Tsar did. With a great, piercing, ripping slice that made Wish jump out of her skin and nearly die from the shock of it, and woke up Bodkin from his faint, for he was still hanging on to the handle of the door, the enchanted sword sliced up through the ceiling of the main hall of the spelling competition and through the spell of Tsar's floor. The sword rose up, quivering, hanging in the air in the middle of Tsar's room, pointing up at the glassy surface of the spell above, exactly an arm's length away from Wish. All she had to do was reach out and take it. Oh, thank mistletoe and ivy and every single kind of standing water. Once there were witches, breathed Wish, reading the message on the blade. But I killed them. She reached out her hand. She took the sword. There was a high, piercing, unearthly shriek from the air above her as whatever it was dived. The undulating shape turned dark and very, very solid. There was a confused rush. Something of unbelievable force smashed into the invisible spell above. There was another shriek like a curse, and through the glass above Wish, 3 talons pierced through the spell. 3 great shocks of talons that were very, very real, long and yellow-green, razor-sharp, and carved like swords. Wish screamed. If it were not for that spell, she would have been dead indeed, for whatever it was had been held up by the spell and crashed into it when it dived. Zigzagging lines jigsawed across the spell like ice before it shatters.
Wish thrust the sword upwards, and that extraordinary sword leaped in her hands and dragged her with it upwards. And there was another shriek as the iron of the sword sank through the spell into something soft, and whatever it was, the huge dark shadow above her shrieked again and was still. Wish hauled out the sword, and it came out with a sickening, squelching noise. "Please," begged Wish, "please let it be dead." There was silence for a moment. Perhaps that thing, whatever it was, really was dead. She had sunk the sword into it pretty deep. All around, the snowcats were roaring, and Bodkin was repeating, "Oh, my goodness, my goodness, my goodness," in a horrified way. Wish could see the dull, dark shape slumped on the spell above them. It wasn't moving. "I've killed it," thought Wish, with terrible sadness. "I've really killed it." Tiffenstorm gazed at the sword, her mouth open in horror. "Don't touch the sword," whispered the sprite. The end of the sword was covered in a strange, milky green substance, and it appeared to be smoking. A single drop quivered on the end, and, as if in slow motion, it fell, down towards Wish's hand. But Squeezejuice rushed forward, squeaking, "Be careful! Wish, be careful!" And in his determination to guard the princess, he threw himself in between the drop of falling green and Wish's hand, and he let out a shriek as the green sizzled there, and the poor sprite shook his own hand to shake off the smoking green blood. Squeezejuice leaped up in the air, screaming and waving his hand in horror. Wish tried to catch him, to soothe him, to calm him down, with Tiffenstorm shrieking, "Don't touch! Don't touch!" in a demented chalk screech. More cracked lines appeared all over the surface of the spell above them, like lines on a frozen lake the moment before it breaks. "Get away from the bed!" yelled Wish, and the snowcats and the sprites flung themselves to the edge of the room in the nick of time, for a moment later the cracked, broken spell burst, sending bits of spell raining around the room, and the cold rainwater that had been lying on it came splashing down onto the bed in a bucketing, icy rush, and the dark shape crashed down too, and took the bed down with it, down, 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 burning a bright green hole in that floor and sinking downwards, ever downwards, so that Tsar's room had a great hole in the centre of it, like a sinkhole 7 feet deep, with the corpse of a witch at the bottom of it. "I think it's dead," whispered Wish, shakily peering over the edge of the sinkhole. "It's not moving anyway. Are you all right, Squeezejuice?" "I's not fine," whispered Squeezejuice, shaking his hand. "I's not fine. That is bad magic. Very bad magic." Even as he spoke, the green crept up his arm to his heart and his head, turning him stiff as a tree twig, and he dropped, shaking and trembling like a stone, and fell down rigid to the floor. It is as I said. Bad things have been happening in Tsar's room. Very, very bad things. And a lot can happen in 15 minutes. 11. Tsar gets more than he wished for. Tsar did not immediately notice anything different about his room when the enchanter's magic broke open the locked door and the flying chain slung him in there, with Caliburn flapping in just before the door was magically slammed behind them both. Why would Tsar think there would be anything different? He had only left that very same room about 15 minutes earlier. Anyway, he was too busy swearing loud and long and extremely creative curses at the shut door and kicking it with his foot to notice the strangely quiet, tense, and quite frankly shell-shocked atmosphere in the wrecked room behind him. Tsar, said Caliburn, I think we may have a problem.
"I know we have a problem," howled Tsar. "My father and my brother don't realise how important I am. Nobody realises."
"Now, I'm in a real problem, Tsar."
Tsar turned round. His jaw dropped open. Wish was standing, stricken, holding on to the enchanted sword.
You took my sword, spat Tsar savagely. It's all your fault, you beastly burglar of a warrior. I was beating Luther and then you interrupted. How did you do it, you treacherous daughter of Queen Sycorax?
Tsar made a grab for the sword, and the sprite screeched simultaneously,
Don't touch the sword!
And that was when Tsar realised that things had gone even more wrong than he thought. His room was always messy, of course, but now, right in the centre where the bed once was, there was an enormous hole 7 foot deep instead. Wish and Bodkin were standing sadly on either side of it.
What have you done to my room? Gasped Tsar. Oh my goodness, I only left it for 15 minutes. What have you done to my room?
Bodkin pointed down the hole.
A witch attacked us. We killed it.
Oh, by ivy and mistletoe and green things with long hairy whiskers, goggled Tsar. Are you quite sure it was a witch? It wasn't just a Rogobreath coming to get its blood back?
Take a look,
said Bodkin. Tsar peered down into the hole, and there, at the bottom, was something huge and dark and dead, with long feathered wings for arms and a nose like a beak, and even though it was not moving, a reek of dark magic came off that crumpled feathered thing so strongly that it made Tsar reel back. Yup. He'd never seen a witch before, but that was a witch, all right. Oh, by the nostril hairs of the grim grisly gruntle ogre. What had his father just said about obtaining magic from a dark source? The reality of a situation is sometimes a little different from the imagining of it, and the recent scene with his father had made him realise that perhaps Incanzo wasn't going to be as open-minded about witches and dark magic as Tsar had thought he would be. And what was that threat about taking all Tsar's beloved animals and sprites away from him?
Be good, said Tsar through white lips. My father just said be good. I don't think this really counts as being good, do you?
He gazed down at the hole in a sort of trance.
I mean, a big hole the size of a beastly great dolmen right in the middle of my room with a witch in it.
Tsar waved his arms around in agitation.
How are we going to get rid of it? We have to get it out of here. My father said one more disobedient thing and he was going to expel me. I think this counts as about 50 disobedient things, don't you?
You can't touch it,
screamed Tiffenstorm and Ariel. Don't go near it.
How can we get rid of something we can't even touch? Said Tsar. We'll have to cover it, but with what?
Tsar started rather desperately kicking leaves down the hole, but it was like trying to cover a volcano with individual snowflakes. And that isn't the worst of it, said Wish, swallowing hard. Carefully, Wish laid down the sword and opened a piece of cloth she was holding in the other hand. Inside lay Squeeze Juice, shaking like he had the plague. Okay. Just when Tsar thought that things couldn't get worse, they got worse.
What on earth happened to Squeeze Juice?
Gasped Tsar. He got witch blood on him, said Wish, sorrowfully. I'm so sorry, Tsar.
Is that bad? What does that mean? What's wrong with him?
Squeeze Juice had turned jade green in colour, and his wings had folded up like they'd been crushed in an invisible fist. Every now and then the trembling would cease, and he turned absolutely rigid for a second, as if he had been frozen, before breaking out into violent shaking once more.
"I guarded the princess," said Squeeze Juice, "but I's fine. I's just fine."
But you could see from Squeeze Juice's scared eyes that he was terribly frightened about what was happening. Caliburn said sadly, "Sprites are much smaller creatures than you are, Tsar. The witch blood will affect them much harder. You have led this sprite into bad, bad trouble."
"I will take this sprite to my father," said Tsar, through numb white lips. "My father can do anything."
Caliburn said gently, "I think even your father will not be able to heal Squeeze Juice, Tsar." It was time for some very hard truths. "For very soon this sprite will either die or fall into a coma," said Caliburn. "And when he wakes, he will have turned to the dark side. He will become a creature of the dark, and it will seek out witches to be his master." A horrible silence. "And this means that the stain on your hand really is witch blood," said Caliburn. "I am so sorry, Tsar. I tried to warn you.
You wish to be magic, and now you have the wrong kind of magic."
Tsar turned over his hand. There, right in the middle of the palm, was the bright green stain. There was no way of covering it, any more than he could cover the great big hole with the witch in it in the middle of the room. He tried to wipe it off on his cloak, but it did not move.
"I can't even make the witch blood perform magic," said Tsar, sadly.
"If your father finds out that is witch blood on your hand," said Caliburn, "he will send you to a correctional facility, and maybe the dark magic will not yet have reached your brain, and you can be saved from turning to the dark side yourself. But your father would then be forced to expel you from the wizards forever."
"No!" cried Tsar. "No!"
"What would you have your father do, Tsar?" said Caliburn. "The other wizards were calling for you to be expelled just for trying to get dark magic. But you have succeeded, Tsar. You have been in the bad woods, and that is forbidden. You have brought iron into the camp, and that is forbidden. You are using dark magic, and that is forbidden. You have drawn a witch to us, and that is forbidden."
"No!" yelled Tsar.
"Even your father cannot turn back time, Tsar," said Caliburn. "Nobody can turn back time. That is impossible."
"That's the point of magic, isn't it?" said Tsar. "To do impossible things."
There was a long silence.
"There are some things that are done that cannot be undone," said Caliburn.
"Ah, do as you would be done by, or you will be well and truly done, is a harsh law indeed."
"You stupid warriors!" raged Tsar. "This is all your fault. This is your stupid sword and your stupid witch, and I should never have left Squeeze Juice with you when you can't look after him."
Wish and Bodkin looked away, for Tsar, the boy who never cried, was crying. Tsar knew in his heart of hearts he couldn't really blame Wish and Bodkin for this. He felt a sludgy, depressed weight of guilt. This was all his own fault. Squeeze Juice had trusted him. If he couldn't save Squeeze Juice, he would never forgive himself.
"I'm so sorry, Squeeze Juice," said Tsar wretchedly. "I never meant for this to happen. There must be some way I can make amends and put things back to the way they were."
"I trust you, master,"
said Squeeze Juice through shaking green lips, looking up at Tsar adoringly.
"You is my leader, and so you will rescue me, because that is what a leader does."
Tsar carefully put Squeeze Juice in the front pocket of his waistcoat, and then Tsar put his arm in front of his face.
"I wish I had never wished to be magic," said Tsar passionately. "I wish I could give it all up so that Squeeze Juice could be fine again. I wish I had never set that stupid witch trap in the first place. I wish.
But wish how he may, Tsar could not turn back time. They had all wanted Tsar to learn a lesson, but this was a far, far worse lesson than anyone had ever dreamed of, and it was dreadful to see him crying and sitting there so small and silent and sad and un-Tsar-like. Even his quiff of hair had drooped. Tsar cried, and Wish patted him on the back sympathetically, and the animals and the sprites pretended they hadn't noticed he was crying. Every now and then Tsar blurted out fiercely,
"I am not crying, and I will kill anyone who says I am!"
and the sprites pretended to be terrified of him to make him feel better. Down in the hall below them, the sound of music stopped abruptly to be replaced by voices. Tsar removed his arm from in front of his face, suddenly alert.
"Listen,"
whispered Tiffinstorm.
"Someone must have noticed the break in the magic covering the fort. They will be telling the King Enchanter."
The three children looked at each other, at the green dying sprite, at the sinkhole in the centre of the room with the corpse of a witch in it.
"They will know it is something to do with you, Tsar. They will come up here, into this room."
This was bad. There was no doubt about it. This was really, really bad. Wish looked at Tsar's face, transformed from its usual cheekiness into total misery and guilt at the plight of his sprite. She forgot Tsar was an enemy and had stolen her sword and kidnapped them. She put out her hand and touched Tsar on the shoulder.
"Don't despair, Tsar," said Wish. "It's not too late. It's never too late. I have a plan for how we could save Squeeze Juice."
Bodkin felt the first stirrings of unease.
Yes, said Tsar, lifting his drooping head. Do you remember I told you earlier on my mother has this stone that takes away magic that she keeps in her dungeons? Said Wish. We could take you back with us to Warrior Fort, and then we can break into my mother's dungeons and get Squeeze Juice to touch the stone, and that will take away the bad magic of the witch and save his life, said Wish. Could that work? Said Tsar, eagerly turning to Caliburn.
Yes, no, I don't know, said Caliburn. I suppose in theory that is what the stone does. It takes away magic. But something tells me this is an extremely bad idea.
Well, generally, it would be a bad idea to touch a stone that takes away magic, said Tsar, with growing excitement. But in this case, we have a whole lot of magic that we want to get rid of, don't we? Because at the same time, I can touch the stone and get rid of this witch blood on my hand, which my father wouldn't like and doesn't even work. I also wonder what happened to Crusher, said Wish, thoughtfully. He hasn't got back yet, has he? I'm a bit concerned that my mother's warriors might have captured him. Do you think so? Said Tsar, suddenly worried, for in his Tsar-like fashion he had completely forgotten about Crusher. Do you mean to say I may have put Crusher in danger as well? Wow! Even for me, this has been a really bad day. Tsar was looking crestfallen again, so Wish hurriedly pointed out that while they were in Sycorax's dungeons, if Crusher was in there too, they could release him. That's a brilliant plan, and it solves everything all in one go, said Tsar in relief. For an enemy, and a weird one at that, you've come up with a great idea. What are we waiting for? Let's go!
Hang on a second, boggled Bodkin. This isn't brilliant at all, Princess. I am putting my foot down. You can't take this lunatic back to Warrior Fort with us. I have to agree with Bodkin, said Caliburn, and if Queen Sycorax catches Tsar, she'll put him in her dungeons forever, not to mention take away the magic of all his other sprites.
My mother's not as bad as all that, objected Wish. She's lovely.
Well, I wouldn't say lovely exactly, said Bodkin, gloomily. Scary, that's what she is, scary. She is one scary mother.
She's a queen and a mother, and it's a mother's job to be scary, said Wish.
Well, she's very successful at her job, shivered Bodkin.
But we've got to go into the dungeons anyway to return my mother's sword, and we can't let poor Squeeze Juice die, can we? Said Wish. This is sort of our fault too, and he's flown by our side. Look at him. Tsar sensed Bodkin weakening as he looked at the tragically rigid body of the little hairy fairy tucked into the front of Tsar's waistcoat, shivering in pain and fear. Poor Squeeze Juice, sighed Tsar. He will be so unhappy trapped in a coma. He loved to dance, you know, to fly through the windy trees in autumn. And now his feet will be locked, his voice that sang to nightingales choked in his stony throat.
Stop it,
said Bodkin, putting his hands over his ears. And even Tsar, said Wish. He's conceited and full of himself and kind of annoying. I am, aren't I? Said Tsar proudly. But we can't let him get expelled from his tribe. Tsar made a few mistakes. But doesn't he deserve a second chance? We all deserve a second chance, pleaded Wish. Bodkin sighed.
All right, he said. It's a mad idea, but all right, we'll help them. But you have to promise me, Wish, after all this is over, you really will start being a normal, ordinary warrior princess.
I promise, said Wish. The three of them shook hands on the plan. Who'd have thought it, marvelled Tsar. Wizards and warriors working together. The sound of voices and running feet was getting nearer and nearer. Okay, said Tsar briskly. Wolves, Bear, you stay here. Caliburn, Snowcat, Sprites, you're coming with us. But we're going to need to be quick here, so we'll have to go by door. Tiffinstorm, do the spell.
Why is it always me who has to do everything?
Grumbled Tiffinstorm, getting out a number 6 from her wand bag and lobbing one of her spells at the door of Tsar's room.
What do you mean, go by door?
Asked Bodkin uneasily. As if in answer to his question, with a mighty creak, the door of Tsar's room shrugged in its frame and tore itself out of its hinges and waddled into the centre of the room before tipping, slam flat on its face onto the floor, and then gently rising about a foot in the air in a cloud of dust. Tsar climbed on top of it, shouting, "Come on, you guys, quick, quick!"
"Oh, no," said Bodkin, shaking his head hysterically. "The snowcats were bad enough, but are you really expecting me to ride on a door like a flying carpet in a story?"
"It's perfectly safe," said Tsar, helping Wish up beside him. "Kind of, and the snowcats can run a lot faster when we're not on their backs. Hurry!" Come on, Bodkin, said Wish excitedly. The snowcats had already jumped out of Tsar's window and climbed down the ladders and platforms, so it was too late to travel by snowcat. Even the enchanted spoon had hopped on enthusiastically next to Tsar and Wish and seemed to be looking at Bodkin expectantly, as if he had faith that Bodkin could be the kind of person who would see flying on the back of a door as an exciting opportunity rather than an act of suicide. Oh dear, I have to do this. I can't be less of a hero than a spoon, but... What am I doing? Thought Bodkin, as he clambered onto the back of the door beside Wish and Tsar. It wasn't even an entirely complete door, for the door of Tsar's room had led a difficult life, so there were great cracks and splits all across it. Held together by magic, held together by magic, Bodkin repeated to himself reassuringly, as Tsar jerked the key in the keyhole frantically to the right, and Bodkin grabbed onto the top of the door only just in time as, with a sickening lurch, it flew off, up through the non-existent ceiling and into the night. For the first 5 minutes, Bodkin was so terrified he didn't even open his eyes. He just concentrated on not falling off and not fainting and not throwing up because of the wild swooping motion of the flying door. And when he did eventually open his eyes, he regretted it. They were slaloming madly through the trees of the forest, and through the crazy paving of the cracks in the door, below him he could see the running snowcats and the bright little blinks of the flying sprites. Bodkin let out a moan of fear. Wish's eyes were like stars. She was enjoying it so much. She and Tsar were whooping with every swoop. It had to be said, Tsar was an excellent, if reckless, flying door driver. The door swayed and soared like a peregrine falcon, with Tsar swivelling the key in the keyhole with exactly the right smoothness and dexterity to slalom its way neatly through the forest. "We're going to crash, we're going to crash," moaned Bodkin. "We're not going to crash," said Wish exultantly as they swooped through the upper canopy. "We're flying like birds, and we're going to get back before morning, and we're going to cure Squeeze Juice and free Crusher and get rid of Tsar's bad magic. We're going to crash, and if your scary mother catches us breaking into her scary dungeons, we'll be in such trouble it doesn't bear thinking about," chattered Bodkin through white lips. "Don't think about it then," advised Wish. "Maybe she won't catch us, Bodkin, and we haven't crashed yet, have we? Just relax and enjoy it. It's not every day you get to fly somewhere by door. Just go with it." And as they soared gloriously and recklessly through the trees on the back of the broken flying door, the night wind blowing their hair back, Bodkin found, to his astonishment, that if he let himself relax and go with the motion of the door, he could whoop with joy along with the others. Bodkin's father would have been amazed, and not very pleased if he could have seen him now. This is the problem with adventures. They bring out parts of you that you never even knew were there. The feathers fly on, and we have to follow. I told you that these woods were dangerous. Part 2. Making Amends. 12. Iron Warrior Fort. Tsar and the sprites and the snowcats and Wish and Bodkin were lying in the undergrowth in front of Iron Warrior Fort. They had a problem. Breaking out of a heavily armed warrior fort with 7 ditches and 13 watchtowers is hard enough, but breaking in is virtually impossible. And it is made even harder if you are accompanied by a wizard with a witch stain and a band of snowcats and sprites. They could see the sentries on the battlements, pacing nervously up, down, constantly straining to see what was out there in the forest. They had abandoned the door in the cover of the forest, for a flying door is rather conspicuous, and then Wish led them round to the stable entrance, which was where she had sneaked out in the first place. The doors there were always opening and closing, with hunting parties going out and returning. Tsar got the sprites to cover them with weather spells and invisibility spells, so that they could sneak up on the entrance without being seen.
"This will only work until we get inside the fort. Tiffenstorm's magic will not work in there,"
warned Tiffenstorm.
"There is too much iron."
"Stop worrying, everyone," said Tsar confidently. "I've broken into more forts than you've had hot dinners."
It took a while for the little party of snowcats, sprites, Tsar, Bodkin and Wish to manoeuvre themselves into position underneath the drawbridge. And then the plan worked beautifully. At first. Tsar and Wish and Bodkin and the snowcats stole invisibly into the fort under the cloak of Ariel and Tiffinstorm's spells. It wasn't until they were a good way into the stable yard that it was clear that the spells were being affected by the sheer amount of iron surrounding them. To Tsar's horror, he could see his feet below him slowly becoming visible. Wish and Bodkin were even more obviously there already, although Bodkin was materialising the other way round, and for a second he was just a ghoulishly floating torso. But if they could just make it to the next building, thought Tsar in a panic, maybe they could hide in the shadows there. "Run!" he whispered. "Run!" Too late. A sentry had turned to see the bottom half of a gradually becoming visible snowcat bounding across Queen Sycorax's stable yard. "Magic!" roared the sentry. They were discovered. Wish had to make up an entirely new plan right there on the spot. "Help!" cried Wish, who was now entirely visible. "Help, help, help! Over here! Wizard attack!" The wizard guards turned. And there was Sycorax's weird little daughter, pointing at a wizard with 3 furious snowcats and a cloud of buzzing sprites. "Wizard attack!" cried the guards. "Sound the alarm!" The wizards don't often attack the warriors for obvious reasons, but warriors, nonetheless, are always ready for any kind of attack. Ready in a manner that you could almost call overkill. From all over came the thunderous sound of clattering armour and the clanking of swords and the stamping of iron-clad feet as the soldiers of Queen Sycorax leaped into action. "The attack is in the 3rd quarter! Backup is needed!" roared the guards, who had already surrounded them, swords, spears, pikes at the ready. "Call out the sprite catchers! Ready the snowcat trappers! Alert the magic police!" The shouting grew louder, and the household defender warriors poured from all directions into the stable yard. "Oh, by the goggle eyes of the green-bearded, green-toothed goblin," thought Tsar, "there's masses of them! I never thought there could be so many warriors in the world." "Kingcat, Night Eye, don't you dare move!" spat Tsar, for he knew that the snowcats were longing to launch themselves at the enemy, and he could see from the look in the warriors' eyes that if the snowcats even made one bound in their direction, they would kill them instantly. Tsar put his hand to his belt to take out the enchanted sword, but the sword was not there. He looked up. Wish was 10 yards away from him now, and she had been swooped up in the arms of an enormous warrior. "The princess has been secured and made safe," roared the warrior, and one look into Wish's guilty eyes told Tsar everything he needed to know. Tsar was furious. Treachery. Betrayal. Wish had nicked that sword off him. He had fallen into the trap of trusting an enemy, and just when he had relaxed and let his guard down, thinking Wish was on his side, she had the sheer cheek to steal it off him when he wasn't looking. Tsar conveniently forgot, of course, that he himself had done exactly the same thing only a couple of hours earlier. Wizards are very good at cursing. It was a habit that they had caught from the Druids, who used it as a way of attacking the enemy. So Tsar cursed now, and he cursed loud and long. "You treacherous, shrimpy burglar of a warrior!" yelled Tsar. "My father was right about you guys. You're traitors and liars, and you, Wish, are as wicked as your repellent, magic-hating murderer of a she-devil mother."
"He insulted the Queen, and he's going for his weapon," cried the chief guard. "Archers, eliminate him!"
The archers at the back of the warrior ranks raised their bows all in time with each other with exquisite precision. They were so well trained it would have been a pleasure to admire their timing if they were not just about to kill you. "No!" shouted Wish from the arms of the warrior who was carrying her. "He's not armed! Don't you dare kill any of them, or I will tell my mother!" Now, the warriors were not above killing an unarmed wizard. In fact, they did it quite a lot when Sycorax wasn't looking. But they were, to a man and a woman, absolutely petrified of their queen. So reluctantly, the archers' arms wavered in a disappointed sort of way, but they did not let go of their arrows. They lowered their bows.
"Secure the targets!" shouted the chief guard. "Contain the rebellion! Launch the sprite catchers, and when you've done that—"
The chief guard sighed and swallowed hard.
Somebody had better go and inform Her Majesty.
The chief guard's deputy stepped forward.
Do we have to? Of course we have to, barked the chief guard. In fact, since you've had the cheek to question my orders, I nominate you as the lucky person to go and tell her.
The sprite catcher warriors fired bows that launched nets with little iron weights attached to them into the air towards the sprites. Out in the open air of the forest, the sprites could fly fleet as arrows, dodging and feinting with such quicksilver swiftness that they were just a blur of energy and light. But here, the iron surrounding them acted like a drug on their flying skills. They bumbled about, slow and confused, shrieking madly, poor little things, as they scrambled away, trying to get far from the scary iron, but instead plummeting to the ground, caught in the nets and gasping and straining for breath like stranded fish. All of them were caught, apart from the tiny, hairy fairy Bumbleboozle, who had crept into Wish's pocket as soon as disaster struck. The guards leaped forward, and Tsar was bound with chains so tightly that only his head was poking out. The snowcats were chained up too, and the wolves. "Turnips in tin cans!" roared Tsar, bright red with anger. And that was how Sycorax saw him when she first swept into the stable yard a little time later, to find a bundle of chains with a wizard boy's head poking out of it, screaming insults at her troops. 13. The Questioning of Queens. At the entrance of Queen Sycorax, the warriors bowed so low their foreheads nearly hit the floor. Sycorax was scary. But then she was a very great queen, and as Wish said, maybe great queens have to be scary. There were those who said that a woman was too weak to rule a tribe of invading iron warriors, but they said it very, very quietly, just in case Queen Sycorax should hear them. She was lovely, all right, if by lovely you mean pretty. Hair like a golden waterfall, slim as a candle, 6 feet tall, and most of it muscle, all the sort of stuff that comes in handy if you're going to be a warrior queen and you like to make an entrance. Whether her character was lovely, well, that's an entirely different question, and we'll have to see about that. She was dressed in white, with a single black pearl hanging from one ear. Queen Sycorax talked very, very softly, in a golden pear drop of a voice that was as mild as the bite of an adder. She did not have to speak loudly, that lovely Queen Sycorax, for everyone leaned in to listen, and you could hear a pin drop in the terrified silence that followed her around like a sweeping cloak. Even Tsar stopped his cursing for a moment. "So," said Queen Sycorax in that quiet, gentle voice, as sweetly pure as the stab of an icicle, "where is this wizard attack that has so rudely awoken me before daybreak?" Petrified, the chief guard stepped forward and indicated Tsar, the sprites, and the snowcats with a sweep of his armoured hand.
"We have contained the attack, Your Majesty," said the chief guard.
"Yes," said Queen Sycorax, surveying the wizard attack. "It's not a very large attack, is it, to warrant waking a queen so early in the morning? I thought I was supposed to have the finest warrior sentries in the warrior world, and yet one small wizard boy can still enter my fort undetected."
"Step forward, the sentries who let the wizard attack happen!"
roared the chief guard. The sentries stepped forward smartly.
"The sentries on watch should be locked in dungeon 308, and as the officer in charge at the time, Chief Guard, I hold you responsible, so you can lock yourself in too, and post the keys back through the bars," said Queen Sycorax. "I have no need for failures in this fort."
"Yes, Your Majesty,"
bowed the chief guard, and he and the sentries marched off to lock themselves in dungeon 308.
"Who captured the wizard and his magic companions in the first place?"
"Your daughter,"
said another guard, indicating Wish. Queen Sycorax raised an eyebrow.
"Really?" said Queen Sycorax in surprise. "How unusually warrior-like of her."
Next she said,
"Unchain the prisoner."
"But Your Majesty, is that wise?"
said the deputy to the chief guard.
"He is a wizard, after all."
Queen Sycorax gave him a look. The deputy undid Tsar's chains. The warriors and the citizens of the fort who had arrived on the scene took a step back, for wizards were known to be extremely dangerous. Queen Sycorax glided round Tsar, looking him over as if he were an unusual type of insect that she was seeing for the first time.
"Who are you, and what are you doing in my fort?"
"I am Tsar, son of Incanzo, the great king enchanter," said Tsar proudly. "And the wild woods belong to us wizards, not you stupid, magicless, heartless invaders."
Queen Sycorax sighed. "The ignorance of these poor wizards," she said. "We are civilization. We are progress. Look at us. Look at our weapons, our clothes, our tapestries, our furniture. You wizards, in comparison, are barely better than animals." The fort was, indeed, very dazzlingly decked out, and Queen Sycorax had a thing about tidiness, so every piece of armour and sword was polished until it shone like silver. Even the giant heads hanging in the main hall, dead as doornails though they were, had their beards brushed daily. So the whole effect was pretty spectacular, and Tsar was secretly rather impressed by the sophistication of warrior weaponry and the splendidness of their clothes and fort. So this stopped him a moment. Caliburn said warningly, "Warrior stuff is dangerous. It seduces you."
"And why do you need these warrior knickknacks?"
hissed Ariel.
"When you have the moon to dance under and a violin to sing the tune. Are they worth your freedom, your wandering spirits?"
"That's right," shouted Tsar. "You warriors have come here and stolen our forest, and one day when I grow up to be the leader of my tribe, I promise I am going to kill the lot of you."
Queen Sycorax looked at him intently.
"Will you now?" she said. "Well, this is interesting. I could make sure that you never grow up, couldn't I? Or Incanzo might be willing to pay to have his son returned, or we could hold on to you in exchange for his good conduct."
Tsar looked the queen straight in the eye. The thing about Tsar was, he didn't scare easily.
"You, Queen Sycorax, are the softest, pitiless warrior queen I have ever seen," said Tsar.
Sycorax flinched. The entire courtyard took an intake of breath. Queen Sycorax's eyes sharpened to splinters.
"What did you say?"
"Evil destroyer of forest!" shouted Tsar. "May you be ground by the teeth of a rogabreath into teeny little pieces of dust much smaller than the fleas of an itch sprite."
"Be polite, Tsar," said Caliburn in an agonized fashion.
"Wickedness on legs, pointy ears, hair like a bear's bottom, nose like a pointy potato."
Once Tsar started cursing, he really put his heart and soul into it. It had been a difficult day, what with being humiliated by Luther and told off by his father, and he put all the fear and the fury into a long, elaborate cursing of Sycorax, Queen of the Warriors.
"Oh, Tsar," moaned Caliburn, his wings over his eyes. "This time you're asking to get yourself killed, you really are."
"You can curse all you like, Tsar, son of Incanzo," whispered Queen Sycorax, her eyes like flinty arrows. "But it may not get you what you want."
"What do you want, by the way?"
Tsar suddenly remembered what he wanted. He wanted to save Squeeze Juice. He stopped mid-curse, panting.
"I demand that you put my sprite and my hand on the stone that takes away magic, as soon as you can," said Tsar.
Sycorax looked at him in astonishment. She was used to prisoners who begged and prayed and beseeched and pleaded that they should never be taken to the terrible stone.
"Please, please, please, Queen Sycorax, we will do whatever you want, but do not take us to the stone that takes away magic."
Not prisoners who demanded to be led there immediately while at the same time insulting her. This wizard might be full of trickery, but Sycorax was used to trickery. She was tricky herself.
"Take me to the stone," said Tsar, "as quickly as your stupid, lumping great warriors can move in those iron fool suits of theirs. This is an emergency."
And then he reached into his breast pocket and his hands were shaking as he unwrapped Squeeze Juice. Oh, this was terrible. With a lurch of his heart, Tsar saw that Squeeze Juice was looking worse than ever. He was green as emerald, trembling all over as if he had the flu, drifting in and out of consciousness, rigid one moment, fever-racked the next. For a second, the hairy fairy's glazed, confused eyes focused as if he knew where he was, and he held up his feverish, shaking little arms in entreaty to Tsar and the other big people.
"Help me," whispered Squeeze Juice. "Help me."
Tsar turned to Queen Sycorax.
"I want to save my sprite,"
said Tsar despairingly. Queen Sycorax started as she looked at Squeeze Juice. "What happened?" said Queen Sycorax grimly. "To your sprite?"
"He got witch blood on him," said Tsar.
The warrior soldiers and citizens gave a great gasp of horror and stood back even further from the wizard boy. Queen Sycorax was a very great warrior queen, so she would never show fear, but her face turned to a diamond stiffness. "A witch, you say?" said Queen Sycorax.
"But witches are extinct,"
said the chief deputy.
"Liar!" called a warrior from the crowd. "All wizards are liars!"
"I saw the witch dead myself," said Tsar. "It was definitely a witch, and it gave me this."
Tsar held up his palm to show the green stain in the middle of it.
"A witch stain!"
cried the crowd, and they stepped back even further. "Cowards!" snapped Queen Sycorax. "According to legend, witch's blood is only dangerous if it mixes with your blood. Show me that hand of yours, boy." Tsar put his hand out again. Queen Sycorax stared at the green mark. She took a good look at Squeeze Juice too, taking the little bundle he was wrapped in out of Tsar's hands and looking at him from all angles. And then she turned to the crowd. "It is as I suspected," said Queen Sycorax, holding up the poor poisoned sprite so that everyone could see him, and then she lifted her gentle voice to one of ringing hardness. "Witches are not extinct, and they have returned to the forest." The crowd recoiled in horror. "I have been right to arm us as I have done," cried Sycorax. "Right to increase our sentries, add to our watchtowers." To Tsar she said, "Now I see why you might want to visit the stone that takes away magic rather urgently, Tsar, son of Incanzo. It is, as you say, an emergency. For unless your sprite touches the stone to remove the witch magic within the next 24 hours, I imagine the sprite will die." Sycorax was a noticing sort of person, and she certainly noticed the tears in Tsar's eyes when she said those words, and the shake of his head.
"No," whispered Tsar. "No, he must not die. He will not. He must not. I will not let him die. Don't worry, Squeeze Juice. Trust me, I won't let that happen."
For Squeeze Juice, cowering and quaking in the Queen's hands and staring up at her stern, unrelenting profile, had let out a whimper as he heard these words. Sycorax sighed sympathetically. "A queen of warriors must be merciful as well as strong," she said. "And so I shall take you and your sprite to the stone, and I very much hope for both your sakes that it will not be too late." Sycorax handed the bundle containing Squeeze Juice to her deputy, who held him out at arm's length, shaking, for he did not want to be holding a witch-poisoned sprite. "But before I take you there," said Sycorax sweetly, "I have a few questions to ask."
"Uh-oh," whispered Caliburn. "Be careful, be very careful, Tsar, of the questioning of queens."
"You mentioned that you saw a dead witch," said Queen Sycorax. "That interests me extraordinarily, for according to legend, witches are hard to kill. So, who killed this witch? And with what?" There was a silence. Standing some way behind Queen Sycorax, Wish was waving her arms about frantically to get Tsar's attention and staring at him in an agonized sort of way. Tsar could see the hilt of the enchanted sword poking out from beneath her cloak, and Wish was mouthing something that looked a bit like, "I'm on your side." Was she really on his side, or wasn't she? Tsar didn't know. But in that moment Tsar realised that just possibly Wish might have stolen the sword, not because she was a treacherously tricksy traitor of a warrior, but because she didn't want the sword to be captured as well as Tsar.
I killed the witch, said Tsar eventually, with the bow and arrow.
Really? Said Queen Sycorax, raising an eyebrow. For, by complete coincidence, only yesterday I lost a large ancient witch-killing sword from my dungeons. It disappeared, poof, just like that. And ever since, my household defenders have been turning the fort upside down looking for it. Do you know anything about that sword, Tsar, son of Incanzo?
No, said Tsar.
A large ancient sword with the words, "Once there were witches, but I killed them," written on the blade.
I've never seen a sword like that in my life, said Tsar.
And do you know where it is now? Said Sycorax, disbelievingly.
No, said Tsar. How could I when I've never seen it in the first place?
You lie, said Sycorax, swift as an adder.
I'm not lying,
protested Tsar. I am afraid that you are, said Queen Sycorax. I said that Queen Sycorax was a noticing sort of person. Her sharp, flinty eyes had spotted something sticking out of one of Tsar's pockets. A half-full bottle of Love Never Lies potion. I know you are lying, said Queen Sycorax, because that is one of your strange wizard medicines which changes colour when a person lies. She pointed at the bottle, and the liquid inside was a swirl of darkest indigo, the deep purple that indicated that the person who was touching it was telling a lie.
Bother it, thought Tsar, she's as bad as my father. That's the second time today I've been caught out by that beastly love potion. I really must remember not to carry one of the truth drugs around with me. It cramps my style.
But how would a warrior queen know about Love Never Lies potion, and what it did? Study your enemy, said Queen Sycorax, as if Tsar had spoken aloud. It is extremely important to study your enemy very carefully. I know a great deal about you wizards and your curses and your wart cunning and your trouble-making poisons, and this knowledge often comes in useful. Queen Sycorax reached forward, removed the bottle of Love Never Lies potion from Tsar's pocket, and shook it, watching thoughtfully as the liquid turned back to pale red again. And the fact you were lying tells me that you have seen my sword. You do know where it is, and if you wanted to, you could tell me its whereabouts right now. Search the wizard. Very reluctantly, the warrior guards searched Tsar, for they did not really want to go anywhere near a wizard with a witch stain, but they were far too frightened of Queen Sycorax to disobey her orders. They found plenty of interesting things in Tsar's pockets, curses and spells and potions and herbs of all sorts. But no sword. Said Queen Sycorax. I wonder what you have done with it. Where is my sword, Tsar, son of Incanzo?
I refuse to answer, said Tsar, folding his arms.
All right, then, said Queen Sycorax, calmly. I will make a bargain with you. I had intended to hold you for ransom. I was going to send a message to your father saying that if he ever wanted to see his rude little burglar of a son alive again, he must give himself up to me. Taking away the magic of the great wizard Incanzo would be a blow the wizards would find very hard to recover from. Tsar flinched in horror. But, mused Queen Sycorax, if witches have returned to the forest once more, I really am going to need that witch-killing sword. So, said Queen Sycorax briskly, I will be very reasonable. If you give me back my sword, I will take you and your sprite to the stone that takes away magic. And then I will not hold you to ransom for your father after all. I will let you and your sprites and your animals go free. How is that for an offer?
Do you promise?
Said Tsar. Of course I promise, snapped Queen Sycorax. Are you questioning the word of a queen? It was a tempting offer. Tsar considered it. He was trapped. He would never be able to overcome so many warriors who were holding him at once, and this would at least get Squeeze just cured, and then he saw Wish's face again. Wish was making anguished eye movements towards the Love Never Lies potion in Queen Sycorax's hands. The liquid had turned so indigo that it was very nearly black.
"You lie," said Tsar, pointing at the Love Never Lies potion. "You lie, and I refuse your offer."
Queen Sycorax gave a start and looked down at the bottle. "Dear, dear," she said, good-humouredly, "that was careless of me. And very clever of you, Tsar, son of Incanzo. I like an intelligent enemy. It keeps me on my toes."
"You're quite right. I am lying," Queen Sycorax admitted. "I have every intention of holding you to ransom for your father after I've taken you to the stone that takes away magic, whatever you do or say."
Wish was so horrified she could not help interrupting.
"But rule number 13, a warrior should never lie."
Queen Sycorax looked at Wish as though she were a slug.
"Amendment to Rule 13. A queen can break the rules," said Queen Sycorax, "in pursuit of a higher good."
Then what, thought Wish, is the point of the rules in the first place? But she kept that thought to herself. Queen Sycorax put the Love Never Lies potion back in Tsar's pocket.
"You are a very disobedient boy, and you obviously have not been treated firmly enough," said Queen Sycorax. "But I think you will find that I am very firm indeed. You need to be given a lesson, Tsar, son of Incanzo, and that is what a prison is for."
Tsar sighed. Why did everyone want to teach him a lesson? Ranter, his father, Caliburn, and now this horrible queen. It was very wearing.
"I shall lock you in my prison," said Queen Sycorax, "and I will not take you or your sprite to the stone," she continued in a hard voice, "until after you have told me where the sword is. Give the sprite back to the boy."
With relief, the deputy handed Squeeze Juice back to Tsar.
"If you don't tell me where the sword is, you will have to watch your sprite dying in front of you," said Queen Sycorax. "As soon as you tell me, I will take you and your sprite to the stone, and then I will hold you to ransom, and your father, if he is weak enough to love a rude, disobedient child like you, will come here to save you, and I will remove Incanzo's magic too."
She smiled at Tsar. It was a beautiful smile. Whenever she smiled at Wish, which wasn't often, Wish's whole world lit up with sunshine. But Tsar didn't appreciate it.
"You and your father and your sprites are all going to lose your magic, whatever happens," said Queen Sycorax in that voice as gently soft as a poisoned arrow. "But if you tell me where the sword is, you can at least save your sprite's life." The Queen continued, "And you love your sprite, don't you? Love is always a weakness, so I know you will make the right decision."
Tsar was trapped. What could he do? Everything was getting out of hand. Squeeze Juice might die, all through Tsar's fault. His father might lose his magic, all through Tsar's fault.
"Queen of evil, heart of ice, cowardly ironclad leader of the rabbit hearts,"
shouted Tsar, beside himself with anger and fear. Queen Sycorax reddened with annoyance. Nothing much rattled her. She took threats, trickery, even violence in her stride. However, nobody had ever dared to speak to her with Tsar's sheer disrespectful cheek before. The warriors secretly admired the bravery of this one small wizard, who was completely at the mercy of the most ruthless ruler in the forest, but was still throwing insults at her with total abandon.
"Take this uncivil little wizard and his sprites and his animals to cell number 445, snapped Queen Sycorax.
Tsar was putting on a brave and angry front, but inside he was feeling total despair and helplessness. He fought and bit and struggled, but he was hopelessly outnumbered, and the guards dragged Tsar and the snowcats and the sprites away, Tsar still cursing Queen Sycorax at the top of his voice.
"You're softer than bunny rabbits! You're weaker than water! You're fluffier than the fluffiest little baby dormouse, and my granny could beat you up with one hand tied behind her back!"